I would like to take the opportunity to thank the ISBCC for the venue today. This is a wonderful center, and I know that they went through a lot to accomplish their goal of building this wonderful center, and we wish them the best, and we thank them for hosting us today. Also, before we begin, I would like to thank everyone who's attended, from individuals and organizations, from the Muslim community and those of other faith communities coming to our program. I'd like to take the time to ask if we have any law enforcement personnel or representatives coming on behalf of any law enforcement, including the FBI or others, if they would acknowledge themselves. Is there anyone here from law enforcement that would like to acknowledge themselves? Just please stand up and let us know if you're here. Okay. Also, another housekeeping item. Please, there's no video or taping in any way of this program, because we have an official video of this program which will be made available by NCPCF. It will be on the website, and it will be available for public use. So we request that no one do any taping without any prior consent, and there will be no taping for this event. All right, I'm going to begin with our first panel, which is, the topic is going to be unpacking preventive prosecution and building community power. And I will start by introducing each individual speaker when their turn is ready. We will begin with Ms. George Friday. George Friday, field organizer, grew up in rural North Carolina in the 1960s. She holds degrees in political science, economics, and African American studies from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where she graduated in 1982. George works with grassroots community and national organizations, providing leadership development and skills training ranging from strategic planning and organizing to fundraising, marketing, and community building. Her work particularly focuses on communication, oppression, change, and the role of privilege in transforming power dynamics, fostering broad, deep economic and social justice change. She brings more than 3 decades of experience to her position as National Field Organizer for the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. And Ms. George. I'm sorry, Ms. Friday.
Good evening. Oh, good afternoon. Sorry. How am I doing? Yes? Am I good? That sounds good. So I'm so glad to be here. It's a thrill to be part of today and hopefully be able to share what may be good and useful information, and certainly some time with the folks here. And I'm thrilled and honored to be working with the National Coalition to Protect Civic Freedoms. So, we're starting a little bit backwards in terms of what's on your program, because I'm talking about building community power. And hopefully that's a great start for today. Because of my work with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, I really embrace thinking about the Constitution, and the we the people part always excites me and resonates with me. Even though I know that in the beginning, when that particular phrase was written, when that document was stamped complete, I wasn't part of we the people. So I don't forget that, but it still resonates strongly with me. And in my experience as a community organizer and movement builder, whatever is the right description of what I do, I found in that experience no limit to the genius and imagination of regular people to perceive and confront and transform experiences of injustice. So that potential among all communities, and I really am talking about all kinds of different communities in my work and lifetime, is inspiring and helps to sort of get you through those moments where you feel dreary and in despair, because I've had so many of those reflections. I actually thought this morning about sharing some of those stories when what I describe is that we all have innate desire for liberty and true, genuine democracy. And when you've had the honor of working with a community or an individual to the point where that innate spark of liberty and freedom is awakened, it's one of those moments you never come back from. And it's one of those opportunities that creates that possibility of building relationships that lead to transformational change. And that's actually called transformational organizing. And one experience I can share with you is that of being in the rural South in the 1960s when I grew up. It makes me feel so old, and I'm up there. I lived in a community where all of us were low income, but mine wasn't the only African American family. Actually, we were black then. A number of my neighbors who were white and low income had family that were in the Klan, uncles, brothers. But we also had and built relationships of principle and equity with each other. And to be able to sit with that contradiction of knowing that when Aunt Clarice and Uncle Stewart come over, y'all can't come to the house that night. Now, and not that we can't come to the house that night because Aunt Clarice or Uncle Stewart would come after us, but Aunt Clarice and Uncle Stewart would do something negative to them. Because when I grew up and worked with low-income white folks who did have relationships or people who were part of a clan, the folks that were attacked most were white people, not so much the people of color. Not acts of oppression didn't happen, right? They just happened in a different way, not so overtly. But the relationship that we built as neighbors that were based on values like we want all our kids to have enough food, so there would be times that we didn't have enough and they gave to us, or they didn't have enough and we'd give to them, over time created the conditions of transformational organizing. Now, while Bernice and Betty's uncles and aunts may have had relationships with folks in the Klan or been in the Klan, they themselves, and certainly their children, did not grow up that way. But that relationship, to create that transformation and change, took years, maybe even decades. And what I've seen as an organizer in my lifetime is that most people who perceive themselves as progressives and wanting change in this country don't have the patience to do the deep work, especially around oppression and privilege, that is required for the kind of change we need to win. Now I want to define to you what I call a win. And the kind of win I get to be part of. So it's a very personal definition of win. But to facilitate building skilled relationships so that diverse communities have the capacity and the collective power for transformational change. Nothing short of transformational change is required in this country, or at least in what we describe as the United States and the borders, the so-called borders of this country. But I also sit with the reality that in this space, in this room, in most of the spaces and rooms where I sit, because I'm sitting with people who are dealing with racial profiling in different forms, whether it's children who have been driven out of the school system and into the prison system, whether it's folks who can't take a deep breath and relax because they're concerned about surveillance, or they can't even drive to the grocery store because they may not be documented and have legal license and they're afraid they'll be deported. So to talk about transformational organizing, transformational change, to talk about something that takes years, even decades to build, when you've got in your face right now that reality of a loss of liberty or ongoing chronic oppression is very difficult to sit with. And all I can do is acknowledge that reality, because the work that I do, both as an organizer for the Bill of Rights Defense Committee and as a change agent to build power, I know is long-term work. In the interim, though, we can have real short-term victories. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those. I also do want to say a little bit about why we do need to build collective power. And I'm going to give you a summary of an exercise that I do about oppression. The exercise is called Bubbles and Bricks. The point of the exercise is to help folks understand the difference between personal pain and oppression. When it comes to this issue of creating transformational change and the reality that some of y'all in this room, some of all of us, may be dealing with the reality of people we love or even ourselves being or experiencing a threat of either racial profiling, criminal injustice, unwarranted surveillance, all of those things that could happen right now, today, last week, tomorrow. But we also have to build for long-term change. So in this context, our current conditions is that personal pain. And that long-term win for legislation that is true and genuinely democratic and protects our freedoms, that is countering the oppression. So the reason I created this exercise, Bubbles and Bricks, is because often I found myself doing training around oppression between race, often with mostly white people and people of color. And white folks, and many of us have experiences that feel oppressive. If you grow up in a household where every Saturday night, if mom or dad drinks too much, someone in the house is going to have to experience violence, or at least horrible, hateful language, that feels oppressive. But the reality is, growing up in that household is finite. As horrible as that reality is, that horrible person is going to die, or you're going to grow, or you're going to move. The condition is going to change. It is not chronic. In the same way, as hard as it is that many of us are dealing with horrible conditions now, there is an end point of that. The other side, though, oppression, living in poverty, being African American, being gay or lesbian, choosing and having your religion respected, that's your religion for generations, those are chronic conditions. And when you're subjected to oppression based on those definitions, that's oppression. Now, personal pain, I said, is finite. It's going to end. Or you can end personal pain by yourself. If someone's abusing you as an individual and you're a child, you can go to that person, you can get an adult or a person of faith or a leader in the community to help stop that. So personal pain can stop. It takes a movement to end oppression. It takes a movement to end racism. It takes a movement to end racial profiling based on religion or ethnicity or what you look like or what you read. That's why we need to build community power. Because as in our face, as the experience is of the oppression right now, and it is, the only way we can really curb it and stop it is by having a movement. And the only way we build a movement is by having collective power. So at the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, we work with communities that are experiencing the fallout and the negative consequences of a government that has been more informed by collective fear than collective faith. And based on that fear, folks are being targeted. So we work with folks who are dealing with the so-called war on drugs, people who have been subjected to the war on terrorism, people who are dealing with the passion to strengthen our borders. So we bring together African American, undocumented communities, South Asian and Muslim communities, to pass locally legislation that limits sharing of information between local law enforcement and INS, DHS, or FBI. We make, and in our model ordinance that you can see on our website, we make specific consequences if the local law enforcement uses resources to put in jeopardy any of those communities in any way. And that's the piece that we think is very effective. That's the short-term win. And we have had wins on that policy in different cities across the country. I hope that you'll find some of that information on the website and find it useful. And I hope that you're able to think about and embrace ideas of building community, maybe with folks who may not be of your natural community usually, or your organic community. It may push your limits a little bit. But in terms of building power, starting to build those relationships with folks that are not usually in your ranks gives you that strength. And through that you share privilege, and through that strategic sharing of privilege is how we really solidify that power. Because there's lots of privileges I have. I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm able-bodied, I can pass as Christian. All of those things help when I'm in community with people who don't have those same privileges. Thanks.
Thank you, George, for that. And I encourage those, specifically those from the Muslim community, to benefit from the interaction with others, and to benefit, of course, from the historical experience of others, because there are a lot of shared things in America that we can benefit from by learning the experiences of others. Now we'll continue with our next speaker. Also, I wanted to mention that of the three initiatives, main initiatives of the NCPCF, preemptive prosecution is one of our main focuses, and you're going to learn about preemptive prosecution here today. And it affects everyone, because we're going to mention names and you're going to say, who are these people? That's the point. They may be nameless. It may be any Muslim or anyone else may be targeted, and the name therefore is not important. It's the issue itself. Our next speaker is Kathy Manley. She's an attorney. Kathy Manley is a passionate advocate for peace and justice. Kathy is one of the attorneys for Yassin Arif in Albany, New York. She has been involved in a number of community groups, including the Muslim Solidarity Committee and Project Salam, as well as the Capital Region chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union, where she serves on the board, and as a volunteer attorney on the legal committee. Kathy serves on the steering committee of the NCPCF.
Thank you, Ashraf. So I'm a criminal defense attorney in Albany, New York, and when we first started representing Yassin Arif back in 2004, I really had no idea. Even though I had been involved in the peace and justice community for a long time, I really had no idea the kinds of techniques, manipulation, and the use of fear that the FBI would bring to that case and to so many other cases. It was quite an horrible educational experience for me. I was used to, I don't know, not so much the courts being fair, but not so incredibly unfair as to basically completely ignore the law and the Constitution. And that's what we experienced in that case. Yassin was the imam of the Masjid as-Salam, a small inner-city mosque in Albany. He was a Kurdish refugee from Iraq, and he was targeted at some point. There was NSA warrantless wiretapping, illegal wiretapping of him that we know about from the New York Times. He was very outspoken, even in Kurdistan under Saddam Hussein. He was speaking out in favor of Palestinian rights. He was speaking out even against the war in Iraq, even though he was very opposed to Saddam. He didn't support the U.S. going into Iraq. And for all those reasons, he was targeted by the FBI, and he was an imam in this inner city mosque, where they were targeting the mosque anyway. So the FBI launched a sting operation in 2003 against him and a co-founder of the mosque, Mohammed Hussein, who was basically collateral damage. The FBI knew that he was not political. He was running a struggling pizzeria, and they used him. They used a criminal informant, provocateur named Shahed Hussein, who went by the name Malik in that case. He was later used in another case in Newburgh. And they set up this very complicated sting operation where they Malik offered Mohammed a loan for his pizzeria, and that was fine. And then he said, I want to help my Muslim brothers, and I want to help you so you don't have to pay back all the money. And he didn't say it was illegal in any way. And Yassin Arf was only brought in to witness the loan. Over months and months of conversations, he would drop these hints that, oh, maybe there's something illegal. It has something to do with this missile, because the FBI gave him a defunct surface-to-air missile, and he never showed it to Yassin. He showed it to Muhammad, and Muhammad was like, what does this have to do with anything? Why are you showing me this? Anyway, I won't even go into all the different aspects of the case, but it was incredibly unfair, and the whole thing was based on these recorded conversations, and Yassin never said anything to show that he knew or thought that this was an illegal loan. He was just witnessing a loan, as he had done many times as the imam. And he even said there's nothing illegal here. And when the Malik asked him if he would support this JEM, this terrorist group that Malik lied and said he was supporting, even though he really had nothing to do with it, it was all a script made by the FBI. Yassin said, I can't help them, I don't know anything about them. And he still got convicted of providing material support to that group, even though he said nothing. The jury actually acquitted him based on every conversation up till the very last day, and there was no new information provided on that last day. But the judge told the jury that there were good and valid reasons for targeting Yassin. That would be completely outrageous in any normal case. It would be thrown right out. And yet they upheld it in this case because they're not following the law. And at first we thought, this is just, an extreme example. There's no other cases like this. We got to just tell everybody about this. And we started looking at some of the other cases to say, oh, well, they must really be terrorists, and we'll compare it. And then we discovered, when we looked into a lot of these other cases, that they were equally unfair, sometimes in different ways, but they were equally unfair. And you can see that wall over there. These are some of the cases we discovered, not all of them, where Muslims, almost all Muslims, were targeted by the FBI, mainly for being Muslim, and they were set up, and there's a few different ways that they do it. And I'm not saying every single person is on that list is 100% innocent, I'm not saying that. Some of them are, definitely. I know Yassin is, and I know some of the other people are completely innocent. There's other people, it's a continuum, there's a lot of different things going on, but they're all unfair cases. They didn't get fair trials, they didn't get anything fair happening to them in court, and they were abused in the prisons, and they were sentenced to outrageously long terms, and if they weren't Muslim, none of those people would have been prosecuted at all. And the FBI brings a lot of different techniques that they use, and of course one is what they did to Yassin, is a sting operation, where they find somebody who's usually a criminal that they have some leverage over, and they use that person to befriend the people, give them gifts, offer them money, all sorts of things, and make a relationship with them that's based on deceit, and then suck them in to whatever plot the FBI is telling them. And these people, they're chosen because they're good at lying, and they a lot of times they'll lie to the FBI too. I mean, it's just a con game and a theater piece, and they do this over and over. And lately, it seems like they've started preying on young, kind of angry, disaffected Muslim men who are angry for a lot of good reasons about things that are going on in the world, but they'll kind of build on that and get them to the point where they're willing to commit a crime. And that's so horrible. There's so many other ways they could intervene or not they, the community, could intervene in those kind of situations without building it up in the wrong direction, so that they can then put that person away for life and use it to create more fear in the community. Because that's what they want, is they want people to be afraid so they can get more money for the FBI, build more cases. I mean, they're being trained that ordinary Islam is somehow terrorist. If they're being trained about that, you can just imagine their mentality here. I mean, this has to stop, and that's why I really appreciated George's presentation, because it's about how do we, because the lawyers can't do it. They're not following the law. The courts are not following the law. The community needs to stand up and come to these cases and, you know, whether the person's 100% innocent or not, say this is not fair what's going on here. This person needs a fair trial. The laws, using secret evidence, using these material support laws where you can be convicted for writing an article, for making a video that doesn't, it's just all these First Amendment activities. Another kind of case besides a sting operation is a guilt by association case, although they all have guilt by association. One really outrageous example of that is the case of the Holy Land Foundation, where in Dallas, a charity that was giving money for Palestinians who are desperately in need, through zakat committees, the same committees that the Red Cross was giving money to and that a lot of other groups internationally were giving money to, and the money did not go for any weapons or anything illegal, and there's no question of that. But the people who ran the Holy Land Foundation charity were convicted of material support for terrorism just for providing that support to these people who desperately needed it, on the theory that somehow by giving money to these zakat committees, it enhanced the prestige of Hamas because Hamas was in control of that area. I mean, it's completely outrageous. And they got like 65 years for that. These are some of the best people in the community. These are the best people that they're going after in some of these cases. So we really need to stand up. We need to not let the fear take over. We need to support these people. You can go to Project Salam's website, projectsalam.org, the NCPCF website, civilfreedoms.org. There's a lot of information. And NCPCF is a new organization. We're trying to have events like this all over the country. We're also working on a database of these cases that will, and then we're going to try to analyze it and come up with statistics showing the kinds of different cases and the kinds of unfair and unconstitutional and outrageous techniques that are used in these cases, and the prisoner abuse that goes on, the solitary confinement, isolation, basically torture that goes on in a lot of the prisons. We're also hope to develop legislation. We got the Albany Common Council in Albany, New York, to pass a resolution requesting that the federal government follow their own Inspector General's report, which found that there was exculpatory evidence in these cases where there was secret evidence that wasn't being provided to the defense because there was no mechanism for that, and saying that these cases needed to be reviewed. So we want to develop legislation on the national level to do the same thing, basically to review these cases, follow their own Inspector General's report. That's one thing. We also want to deal with the prisoner abuse. Maybe, I'm running out of time, but maybe Faisal will talk about that. And so there's a lot of things we want to work on. Also, we do Know Your Rights presentations, and where we tell people, I know there's somebody handed out a flyer here about this. Basically, a lot of Muslims are contacted by the FBI, and what we can say is just tell them that your attorney will contact them. Either have an attorney. If you don't, try to call the ACLU or find an attorney, and just say, it's okay, my attorney will contact you, I have nothing to say. Because they can lie to you, and they can twist what you say, and they don't record what you say. You're just dependent on their word, and then they can charge you with a false statement if you don't become an informant. And you can't trust them. I mean, when they're being trained that all Muslims are terrorists or something, I mean, you know you can't trust them. So you need an attorney if they're contacting you. And, you know, and then your attorney can talk to them and see what they're looking for, and you won't be hopefully caught up in this mess like so many people have been. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for that. And remember, she said they can lie to you, that is law enforcement, but you can't lie to them. That's another reason why you need to have an attorney present in order to protect your rights. So we are advocating as the NCPCF that you should not speak to law enforcement without having an attorney present. And they respect that, because if they come knocking on your door, you say thank you, you ask for their card, and you say, I will have my attorney contact you. Or if you already have an attorney, then you can pass your attorney's card to them and say, please speak to my attorney. Also, another point regarding Kathy's talk was the issue of, I know our community, especially the Muslim community, and I will be referring to the Muslim community throughout, so I ask everyone to bear with me regarding that. But we look at the actions of those who've committed, let's say, criminal acts as designated by the judicial system or the legal system in the United States. We as Muslims, and all of us in the United States, should be focusing on educating our communities, of course, to be responsible and positive contributors to society. There is no doubt about that. At the same time, we also have to hold government responsible for their actions. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. That's why we have the innocence until proven guilty. And even if someone is guilty, they have a right to a fair trial and so forth. So you have to keep that in mind, because a lot of people come to me and say, well, you know, Al-Amoudi came into the country with $300,000 in cash. He did something wrong. Yes, he did something wrong, but that doesn't mean that we should give the government a free pass if they don't give him a fair trial. And which they didn't. They booked the charges in a way to make him plead guilty so that he couldn't go to trial. And there were other instances as well. Our next speaker is Faisal Hashmi. And Faisal Hashmi is the Executive Director of the Muslim Justice Initiative, a non-for-profit organization that aims to expose and address the injustices endured by individuals in the United States under the pretext of the war on terror. The Free Fahd Project is an example of such cases MIJ has advocated. By profession, Faisal is an enterprise software consultant who has worked with top-tier clients throughout the United States. Faisal serves as a member of the Board of Directors and Steering Committee of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, and his organization, MJI, is one of the co-sponsors and a member of our coalition.
Assalamu alaikum to Muslim guests, and welcome to my non-Muslim guests for coming and attending this event. I appreciate the support. As we all do, to talk about these important issues. So I had time to reflect and think about three different speakers, Ashraf and George and Kathy, talk about why we're here. And why we're here is because there's a fundamental breakdown of the security of the Muslim community. This community is under siege in all facets of its existence. It's become marginalized, it's become criminalized to be Muslim in America right now. Why do I say this? I say this because of the various cases that you see on the wall. They're a portion or a fraction of what actually exists, and the actual cases are reflective of a larger policy towards the Muslim community that's been enacted post 9/11. There were elements of it before. Nothing was great before. There was always communities in the existence of American society that were on the margins and always criminalized. But we are criminalized for our beliefs, our ideologies at the moment, and we take many shapes, many colors. And what has this led to? This led to our security here being in doubt. What do I mean by that? The ability of the government to go and target, surveil, provoke the Muslim community is not checked. And you will see many articles, pieces in Mother Jones about informants, long pieces, the new article in the Associated Press about the Joint Terrorism Task Force of the NYPD. These are all reflective of the policy at hand for the Muslim community right now. What does that actually translate into? It translates in the case of Yassin Aref, it translates in the case of Ahmed Abu Ali, it translates into the case of Sami Al-Arian, it translates into the case of Tariq Mahanna. And we are here at the local level in Boston, so many of you should be familiar with Tariq's case. And what happens in these cases? What are the reasons for them being subjected to this profiling, being subjected to these conditions? Well, what are these conditions? So who believes we have the freedom of speech in this country, as guaranteed by the Constitution? Can I see a show of hands? Who believes we have the freedom of speech? Nobody. Okay. Because as a Muslim, it's gone. It's out the door. And how do we know this? Through the various cases where they say your protected speech will be used against you. Your speech from 3 years ago before you were arrested. 12 years ago when you were talking to somebody in Damascus, as Yassin Aref was, and saying, well, his interaction with somebody in Damascus 13 years ago is evidence of his guilt. So this concept of freedom of speech doesn't exist for us. It doesn't exist for various elements. The Somali community in San Diego and Minneapolis, where elements of them have been indicted. The Arab community throughout the U.S., the Pakistani community. What has happened? Hundreds of thousands of people were targeted based on immigration issues. I come from New York City. There was a large community in Brooklyn of Pakistanis. They've all evaporated. They've all left. 100,000 Pakistanis, they say, have left New York City post 9/11. So there's an immigration angle, there's a criminal angle, there's all types of angles that the Muslim community is touched upon and affected through these cases. Now, so these are some of the more high-profile cases, but there have been 500 to 600 high-profile cases in the past 10 years. There's been 600 defendants and prisoners. So, and they span from Hawaii to Alaska. And what I ask you to do is to look into these cases in detail. Look into the case of Ziad Yaghi and the North Carolina 7, Ahmed Abu Ali's case. I ask you to look at the Sami Al-Arian's case. I ask you to watch the documentary on Yassin Aref's case. And you will understand a little bit better how this affects you. Locally, I ask you to stand up for Tariq Mahanna. And in a month from now, he'll be presented for his trial. Guilt by association, from what I can gather at a high level, his case is the cooperating witnesses against him have said bad things to him. And what did he do about it? Not that he actually did it, but the cooperating witnesses against him. And they're working for the government. So that's an element of his case. And what we see is overreach in the government. What we see is the practice of spinning things. And you see that at the fundamental level, due process is denied to you. When you expect the presumption of innocence. There is no presumption of innocence. Why? Because you're put into solitary confinement. It's one of the worst punishments in America to be in solitary confinement. Pre-trial, Tariq is in solitary confinement. Mohammed Warsami, a Somalian man in Minneapolis, was in solitary confinement under something called special administrative measures for 5 years. Then they let him go. But for 5 years, he was the worst of the worst. These are dehumanizing things, and this is a policy towards the Muslim community. The government has enacted a policy to, once they've got you with an indictment, they want to dehumanize you. They want to put you in solitary confinement. What is solitary confinement? 23 hours locked in a cage for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, years, 3 months, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Tariq is coming on 2 years of solitary confinement. So at this point, we look at the government tactics by what they enact. There's something called special administrative measures, which is like on top of solitary confinement, they enact policy to a prisoner. They were talking about prisoners, where the prisoners, once in the cell, they're not allowed to talk out loud. Could you imagine? You're already in solitary confinement. You're not interacting with other prisoners. You're not allowed to talk out loud. You're not allowed to move in certain ways in your cell because it's video monitored, as they deem, and they can punish you. You're not allowed to take a shower by closing the curtains in your cell. So this is what happened, and this is all in America. Quite frankly, Guantanamo is better than what the federal system and the treatment of people in America. What you have to understand is these policies of whatever happened in Guantanamo started here, and it was exported out. The federal system puts prisoners in such conditions that I was in a courtroom 2 years ago for Ahmed Abu Ali, where he stated that these conditions are not fit for animals in the zoo. That's how he feels he's being treated. Your contact with your family is limited. Your contact with, forget about contact with outside of your family. So it's this whole system they set up, whole circumstances they set up to desensitize a person, to dehumanize a person, to limit his interaction, and God knows what's going on in their mind. 60 days of solitary confinement is deemed as mental torture. And this is pre-trial, forget post-trial. Post-trial, you'll end up either, we're talking about prisoner abuse, you'll end up either as a Muslim defendant in a communication management unit where they monitor your interactions, but it's not necessarily solitary confinement, or you'll end up in one of the supermax prisons, which is an underground cell or dungeon that they hold these prisoners in. And again, there's various aspects that you have to understand. You know, we talked about their treatment pre-trial and post-trial in these conditions. We've talked about the lack of due process. The lack of due process also comes into play when you actually go to a trial. They say that everything is secret evidence against you, that your lawyers need CIA clearance to see the evidence, that you can't see the evidence that you're being, that they're leveling against you. So what we're talking again, coming back to it, is that fundamental breakdown of what it is to uphold the justice system. It's an injustice system for the Muslim community, and it's prevalent, it's pervasive. What happens to these families? They're devastated. They're isolated in their communities. What does it mean to be isolated in your community? And you have 500, 600 families throughout that, you know, they're shunned by their community. I've got the note to wrap up soon, but not too soon. And they're left on the margins, you know, we're left traumatized, we're left in fear. And this is by policy, this is by design. That's what they want, a community wrapped in fear, that is afraid to talk to each other, to support each other. And you know what? It's moved on beyond our Muslim community. Anti-war protesters, Stop FBI Repression campaigners, but anti-war protesters that have been indicted under laws that are extremely vague, the material support statute that they use for many of these cases, extremely vague language. But this is it. All the cards are on their side, and you're subjected to, we'll have Q&A after the the material support statute that they apply recently went into litigation at the Supreme Court, the Humanitarian Law Project, where I think some people wanted to help Sri Lankans understand their rights better. Some groups of Sri Lankans deemed as terrorists or so on, Tamil Tigers, to understand how to work in civil society and be helpful and get over it. This is deemed illegal in the material support statute. So, again, we're talking about the law being fundamentally flawed. We're talking about the treatment being heinous towards these defendants. Under the presumption of innocence, even after guilt, you shouldn't treat people like that. We are the only people in the civilized world, the West. Europe has nothing like that. The guy in Oslo, Anders Breivik, not to say that this is just or anything, he faces a maximum of 20 years in jail for killing 60 people. I'm not comparing that, but his actual conditions in jail is a Club Med. He gets a personal trainer, he gets access to free air, all this stuff. Here is a very strict system. It's a very harsh system. And we're coming off a week of Troy Davis. We're coming off weeks of the Pelican Bay rioting. What are they rioting? They're rioting being in solitary confinement in these institutions. And just to kind of wrap up, from my perspective, where do we go from here? We have to go from here to understand at the local level and at our opportunities to help these families to understand these cases. And I ask you to start with the Tariq Mahenda case, which is your local case. But to understand the broad policy behind it, at the higher level, what are the mechanisms, what are the processes, how do people come up with these broad policies, and to work to address them, work to deal with them in a comprehensive, systematic fashion, whether it's coalition building, but to understand that they're inherently unfair, flawed, and unjust. And we need to build a movement, just like George was saying, around that, to understand that. Otherwise, it'll be somebody else coming up and telling their story, because under this new administration, it hasn't abated. There's been one concocted case after the other, whether it's a Somalian guy in Portland, Oregon, or some guy in Springfield, Illinois, one after the other. These have happened, and they continue to happen, and what we need to do is to address them and to say that this policy has to stop towards our community. And I'm going to give up the rest of my time for
You hear these things, and we're not here just to garner sympathy, either from the communities of other faiths towards the Muslim community, or even the Muslim community towards members of the Muslim community, because part of being empowered is to be educated, and part of the process is to educate ourselves on what's happening so that we can contribute to society. Why do I say that? Because, as I said before, that if we're going to solve a problem, we can't look at at one aspect of the problem. We have to look at the problem in total. And one of the things that we can do to help this society is to help our government, help the society to stick to the Constitution that everyone says is the bedrock of what this nation is founded upon. And if it's being dissected piece by piece or ignored or violated, then that's going to affect everyone. And those who are affected after the Muslim community will look to say, what did the Muslim community do, and what did individuals outside of that community do? And so in order to be empowered to do something, we need to be educated, and hopefully that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, I'm going to ask your help because my vision is poor. If you have a question, if you can stand up. I believe the questions, there's a microphone. Okay, so Sister Leila has a microphone for anyone who wants to ask a question, and direct it to the speaker, and I ask the speakers to be as brief and articulate as possible in responding, and try to keep your questions as articulate and as short as possible as well.
I have a question for Georgia, and I have a question for Jack. Georgia, it's about the Bill of Rights. Do we have a Bill of Rights today?
Well, we have a document. Do we, in effect, in terms of it being real?
Yeah.
I would say not. I don't know if any of us are experiencing it. When we ask if we have freedom of speech, there you go.
Okay, so we don't have a Bill of Rights, so there's no sense in us rejoicing in anything like we the people, until we the people come together, right? Be the people.
Well, when I rejoice in We the People, it's because I know and have experienced the transformative magic and power in We the People.
Okay, that was like It's part of my other thing.
Every day.
Equality.
Every
That transformative change thing. Is that like, I mean, if we have, is that like a substitute for like revolution?
Oh, no, it is. No substitute. It is genuine.
Okay. So we're talking about revolution.
We're
right?
talking about
So let's talk
organic,
about it.
collectively defined, building power that is, yes, transformative revolution. That's another word for it.
Right, because if we have no rights as people, and they're legally, the lawyers can't do anything about it. That's what you said, Kathy, right?
That's right, that's right.
Lawyers
It's
can't
us.
do
It's on
nothing
us.
about it, right?
It's on us.
They're not they're not practicing the law the way they wrote it, the way it's been written. They're not using it in that way. When it comes to Muslims, when it comes to anybody who's black, African Americans, anybody like, Brother Troy Davis.
We have to force those who say they're to protect the law to do what they say.
Right.
We have to hold them accountable.
How do we hold them accountable?
By having collective power and calling them out. And there's lots of different strategies around doing that. But one very effective strategy is making it plain that the Bill of Rights right now is not functioning. Therefore, how do we take it back in our hands? So with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, the Local Civil Rights Restoration Act does that. In the same way that Albany passed the resolution, or local cities are passing ordinances, then they make a statement.
Any other questions? If someone has a question, please, short question, and address the speaker to whom you would like to address that question.
My question is to Faisal. What I as a Muslim should do to avoid being a target? What I as a Muslim should do to avoid being a target?
Well, people that are just normal people, for the most part, the Muslim community just living their lives, have been subjected to the government and asked questions. The issue is, if I'm in that position, what should I do? And that is the Know Your Rights campaign. And why should you know your rights? The right that you have a lawyer is because many of these cases revolve around people lying to the FBI. What do they lie about? Somebody came and asked them, well, random things. How many brothers do you have? You said you had 3. Turned out you had 4. That's a lie to the FBI. That's 5 years in jail. That is the impact of what constitutes. And it has happened time and time again throughout the community. So you as a Muslim should remain vigilant and understand your rights, and understand what the support network here is of getting a lawyer. To my understanding, if they come to you and say, do you want to speak to us? And you say, well, thank you, give me your card, I'll get back to you with a lawyer. You don't necessarily, my lawyer will get back to you. You don't necessarily have to have a lawyer at the moment. You don't have to have a lawyer right at that moment. You can go and get a lawyer. It's not the issue that you didn't have a lawyer at the moment. And that's something I think is very key, to understand that you don't have to have a lawyer at the moment, that is somebody that you're going to go get. Because nobody expects to be talked to, unless many of us on the stage. But I think you should remain vigilant and understand what are the proper steps to do.
I want to add to that just very briefly. Be vigilant, be prepared to say you have a lawyer. Live every moment as if you're under surveillance right now. Assume that right now your phone is being tapped, your movements are being tracked, you are under surveillance, and live your life. Be prepared, but do not let it take away any of your joy, any of your imagination, any of your will to live your life. That's all.
Thank you, Chair.
I just want to add to that also, know your rights. Do not talk to the FBI, especially without an attorney, and organize together. Become strong, look out for each other, and defend each other, because when you're a unified community, you're less likely to be targeted. When you're afraid to say anything, stand up for anybody, then nobody's going to stand up for you. You need to organize as a community. We need to organize as a community. That's how you defend yourself.
And this may have to be the last question because of time, so please go ahead.
I have a question about the conditions of pre-trial confinement. How do we fight that, and are there laws that pertain or that should pertain to the treatment of people, especially who are not even charged or convicted of any crime?
I think that has to do with special administrative measures, and I think Faisal actually knows more about it than I do, even though he's not a lawyer, he's studied it a lot.
Pre-trial confinement, you're under the presumption of innocence. What we find in many of these cases that they subject you to some of the most harshest conditions, solitary confinement, limited access to your family, limited access to communication to outside your family. What happens in these cases is people legislate. They actually, litigate. They actually file motions against these conditions that they're in. Most of the time, the answer comes back, these are administrative, not punitive. Well, how are they not punitive if you're under the presumption of innocence and you're being held in solitary confinement? And most of the time they lose these type of conditions cases. So what we're looking to do is, well, I don't know anything about legislation. I think Kathy can talk.
One of the things that the NCPCF wants to do, maybe hopefully sooner rather than later, although it's very difficult to come up with legislation on the national level right now, but we want to develop a bill that would put these special administrative measures under judicial control, which would be not that great because the judges aren't that good, but it would be better than what it is now, where it's just administrative, that the prosecution and the Bureau of Prisons can just do it whenever they feel like it, basically, that at least there would be some more due process. So that's one of the things we're working on.
All right, thank you, both of you. I think we're going to have to end it there so that we can continue with our program. When Kathy referred to legislation, I just want everyone to know that the NCPCF is actually two organizations. We're like the ACLU and other organizations where we have a non-for-profit arm, which is we've applied for 501c3 status. And I'm going to encourage those, of course, who can make donations to the NCPCF to do that. We have a box for donations, and we also have membership. We also have pledge forms that are available. And anything that you give, it's just the idea of pitching in as a community that's going to help us. But so we also have a 501c4 organization which can be involved in lobbying. So just that you know, and that one is not tax deductible for the donors, but we're asking donations for the 501c3, which is tax deductible for the donors. Okay, we'd like to move on if we can.
When the brother asked here, what do I do to protect myself from possibly being a victim, it reminded me of an experience I had as a younger woman. One of my first jobs out of college, I am now, and have probably always been a idealist or a hopeless romantic or whatever it is. I am fueled and guided by faith, and I give thanks for that, and I believe in the best of all people. So, when I moved to D.C. after college for my first job, because I thought working for peace was everything, I really did. I really thought, I'm going to work for peace because that's the end of racism and sexism and homophobia and poverty. I did believe this. So I worked for a peace group on Capitol Hill. And really would not accept the idea that someone would be targeted just because of their skin color or because of their gender. Really worked against it. Really wanted in my heart and gut to not believe that there was no conscious, no conscious conversation and decision to go after young black men. That it could have been the collective consequences of racism or all of these oppressions, but not conscious. Until an evening, when a friend, now I'm a large woman, I don't know if y'all noticed, I'd stand for you if I could, but I think it's a little much. But I'm a larger than average woman, and a friend of mine who'd just come from Ireland and I were standing outside of what was then Sainsbury's, which is where I worked, my first job out of college, in Southwest DC. It's late at night, we're standing outside of the office is closed, it's very, very late at night. He'd just come back from Ireland and brought some alcohol from Ireland, some Irish thing, it's an important thing from Ireland. Can't remember it, but it's special. So we're out in front of the street and then we're tasting this in public, which is probably not legal. And we're loud and boisterous and large. I'm large, he's larger than me. He's white, of course Irish, I'm me. And across the street, there was two young African-American men, maybe in their, not older than 16, I know, sitting on steps in front of another office building, just talking. And he and I are talking boisterously. And then, suddenly there's 2 cop cars. And then there's 4 cop cars. I about lost it. Now, I hadn't had a lot to drink. I'd taken a couple of sips, but I'm not really a drinker. But he was, it was a gift, whatever. He was just back home. I took a couple sips. But I started to get loud. And not just loud, but boisterous. I moved myself into the street and was yelling at the police. Y'all, they didn't even turn around. They didn't turn around because I was not the target. Now, subsequent to that experience, many times while I lived in D.C., in many ways, including doing some outrageously illegal things in front of the D.C. Police Department, in front of their offices, me and some friends couldn't get even somebody to even talk to me. But my brothers came to visit, and from walking from my house to the corner store to get juice for breakfast and back, 3 times they got talked to. And it's no further than from here to, from here to across the street, y'all, and back. So, the reality of racial profiling is severe and very real. And the reason I say the word severe is, at least in my community, it's affected our culture. What I mean by that is, when I was a young woman, some 40 years ago, the concept was new and we fought back as a community. Now, the culture is, it's Saturday night, 11 o'clock, you better be in the house, right? The cultural norm now is, if you are a young black man, you better not be behind the wheel of a car, at least in North Carolina where I live, at Saturday night after a certain time. And that cultural shift has shaped everything in that community. It also affects the communities of people who aren't documented. It's also starting to affect y'all's community in terms of what you think is okay, what you say to your 7-year-old, your 10-year-old, your 17-year-old. That is not all right. Now, the exercise I'd like y'all to do, you have index cards that y'all saw that were on your seats. I invite you, and you don't have to participate if you don't want to, but to write down an experience of racial profiling that you've heard of, you've experienced yourself, or somebody you love experienced, and put the year that it happened on there. That's what I'd like you to do. And then, probably not right now, in the ideal world, there's some cards over here on the floor. There are several different layers of the cards. One layer shows policies that this government has enacted based on racism and discrimination. They go back as far as 1704. We could have gone back into the 1500s or whatever, but we started with 1704. One of the other lines shows acts of racial profiling that have happened primarily to people of African descent. And then another line shows acts of racial profiling that has happened to people primarily of Latino or Chicano descent. And then there's a line that shows acts of racial profiling that have happened to people that are South Asian and Muslim in terms of religion. And they're all over there. Now, in an ideal world, they'd be around the wall, and y'all would take what you've written now and put it in there, and then all of us would do what's called a gallery walk, and we'd walk around and look at what everybody else wrote, and we'd look at what's here. So when you take a break later on, please go look. I'd ask you to do that now, but I think 30 folks or 40 folks trying to hunker over there and look at everything won't quite work. What you will see, however, and what it'll be more powerful if you add your own experiences, is that acts of racial profiling go as far back as the 1700s, as recently as yesterday, and affect all of these communities. Not just people of African descent, or people who aren't documented, or people whose religion is not Christian, but there's information there about folks who are native in this country, information there about folks who are gay or lesbian, and it, I hope, helps to demonstrate both how deep and broad the problem is, and therefore encourages you to understand and participate in an equally deep and broad response in terms of building power and organizing. Now, one of the things I do want to share, and I'll be done in about 5 minutes, so I'll be ahead of time, yay. One of the things I want to share, though, is that I say these things as if they are, and they are, ideologically positive, hopeful, but perhaps not realistic. I'm not limited by that, because I know the imagination of the people that live in this country, and I know it's limitless. So what people think might be possible, I will not allow to limit my vision of what we can collectively do. But I do know that because in the same way our culture has been shaped and changed in my community, so that on a Saturday night after 11 o'clock you can't be behind the wheel, our culture's also been shaped in ways that say, don't you talk to those people. You know, if you associate with those black folks, folks are going to think you're messing with drugs. You know, if you go over there and hang out with those undocumented folks, you're going to get in trouble. So I know that for each of us, we have to culturally challenge ourselves and go beyond our own comfort zone if we're going to build this sense of community. And the first piece about that is to become conscious of, where do I carry privilege? I named before, I'm Catholic, which to me is not strictly Christian, which is why I say I pass for Christian. I'm happy to be Catholic. I would have been a nun if I'm not who I am now, and in some ways I am quite a nun. But I'm able-bodied, I went to college, I'm a U.S. citizen. All of those are privileges. So identify the way that you have privilege, but also answer the question of how have the chronic conditions of oppression limited your own ability to access and use your power to create transformational change. Because there are ways, even ways you're not aware of. And if you do that for yourself, if you're able to identify, how is the fact that every day I know that I'm under surveillance, that I'm on the list of people that might be dangerous, how has that affected your own ability to use your own voice, to feel and use your own power, to share that power with others? Because as you answer that question and unpack and sort of weed the weeds out of that soil that is your bed, your planting bed for power, it will help you develop the skills to be able to connect with people who aren't as similar to you in background, and help it feel a little more comfortable to push your own comfort levels. So I hope you put something on your cards and you add them to the timeline here. Over here is the 1700s, on this side is 2001, at a time that fits in terms of break and that kind of thing. And I appreciate having a chance to be reflective with you about this a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for that. We will, because we are, I'm glad, running ahead of schedule, and that's my job, so I'm antsy about that. But we will have then time to see the board. I will make sure that we have that availability. Thank you for that, George. George, I'm going to spend just the next few minutes talking a little more about the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms and actions that we can do as a community. And here, when I mean a community, I don't mean just Muslim community, but I mean the community of people who are conscious of the importance of working in the civil rights and civil freedoms arena here in the United States. And I don't want to go into a long analysis of how I feel the country is going, but any educated person or any person who is attuned to what's happening to our country right now in the year 2011, we feel that maybe it's going in the wrong direction. And part of that is seeing the rollback of civil rights, and the economy, for example, makes a person think maybe something is not right here. Here we are, a great country of over 350 million people. What is it that is wrong? And part of it, obviously, is that if we don't respect the very law that we embedded in our history as Americans, and that includes the Muslim community, because as a Muslim community, even if it's an immigrant community, you come to this country with the understanding that you will contribute, live in the society, abide by the laws of the society, and so forth. But if there is a problem with the application of those laws, then those who are conscious of it need to speak out, need to organize, and need to work to change it. And we do it locally. First, we start locally, and that's one of the reasons that we come to the communities throughout the United States, because every community has an experience like Tariq Mohanna and Dr. Sami Larian and Arif Yassin and Shifa and so forth. Every community has those cases, and the first line of defense is the local community itself. And sometimes the local community is scared to participate because they see the national scene, the media, and the way that the government is coming down on individuals, and they become frightened. And this is something that we want to let people know, that there is power in numbers. There is power in numbers. And if you're organized as a community, you fight for your civil rights, because it's not given to you on a silver platter. You have to fight for it, and this is how you do it, by education. So you start locally, and that's what we would like to do. When we educate people here, yes, maybe we're preaching to the crowd, in the sense that you have the sense to come here because either you're affected or you know someone who has been affected by the rollback of civil rights, by the violation of civil rights, but you feel it's important, or you know of others, but you feel it's important to come here and to learn, and hopefully you can take what you learn, and hopefully people will take something back to their families and their community in order to organize. And supporting the trials as they come. Remember, you go to a trial to ensure that a person receives a fair trial, because all criminal trials are supposed to be public, and it allows anyone to go into the courtroom and witness the judicial system at work. And you need to do that for yourself and for organizing the community. So at the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, for example, we look at our three initiatives: the preemptive prosecution, preventing preemptive prosecutions, and the situation of prisoners and their families, the harsh conditions that prisoners are being held under. And the third one is the profiling. We look at these three initiatives in a multifaceted manner. As we mentioned, for example, we have our legislative arm, which deals with these issues on a legislative platform. So if there are laws that are in place right now that enable preemptive prosecutions, well, we want to develop bills that will be a counter to that, so that we can get some of those laws repealed, or at the very least, change the way that they're being implemented when there are problems. And we've already begun doing that based on a 2008 Inspector General report from the Department of Justice stating that in these national security cases, these quote-unquote terrorism cases, that there may have been instances where the prosecutors withheld evidence that was exculpatory to the defendants, meaning that because the prosecutors have all the information and they pick and choose what they want to use in order to prosecute someone. Well, there may be evidence in their possession that they don't feel is important to divulge, but if it was divulged, it would lead to the innocence, or tend to prove someone is innocent, or indicate that someone is innocent. And they're actually required to give up that information, but they hold it tight, and there have been instances where that's done on purpose. But even if you want to assume that it's not, we need to find a mechanism in order for those cases to be reviewed based on the fact that this would have happened, that there would be criminal trials where evidence is actually exculpatory, meaning tends to lead to someone's innocence, is held back. So that's an example. We're also, for all of our initiatives, we deal with education, and that's what we're doing here, is to come to the local communities in order to let the local communities know about what we do as a coalition, what our initiatives are, and how we go about doing it, and also to empower the community to work locally to help those cases that are local to them. And we can't afford financially, for example, to raise money for the prisoners' families, because if we were doing that, we wouldn't be able to conduct our activities. So we go to the community and we say, this community, here as an example, Boston needs to take care of Tariq Mohanna's family needs. Someone from the community who is responsible, who is a leader, needs to sit down and say, what are your needs? And they need to work to help with those needs. And we can, of course, be there as an advisor based on our vast experience from the many volunteers that we have in our organization who have come across these things and can provide valuable information to those who are going through these types of cases. So we educate the local community to be empowered to help those who face preemptive prosecution, as an example. Also, we work with the media, and those who are interested in the media, please talk to us, because we like to work with the local media to generate positive stories on these types of cases, because there's a lot of information out there. Most of it is negative. We need to be proactive in terms of providing positive stories and positive takes on these stories that media look from different perspectives, and we can help to humanize it. We can help to bring additional information that is usually missed in these types of cases. So through the coalition, those who are interested in education, we have these kinds of events that we host. You can participate in those. In terms of media, we welcome those who are interested in generating positive media for our cases, and those who are interested in the legislative aspect, we welcome that, because we want to co-sponsor these bills. That means we need Republicans and Democrats, and anyone who has connections or ties with their elected officials can help to push some of the legislation that we've already begun to introduce into Congress as part of our 501c4 project, as I said before. So in action, one of the speakers, I think, said that, the Muslim community is going to be the leading community on the issue of civil rights, or to that effect. And I agree with the speaker, because for those who call them cousins, our cousins, the Jews, went through this before, and we can learn from that. They are some of the staunchest supporters of civil freedoms in the United States. Why? Because they went through it before, and they realize that even if I don't agree if someone is gay or lesbian, but their rights are being trampled on, and the same apparatus that can trample on the rights of a gay or lesbian individual can also trample on the rights of a Muslim or a Jew or a peace activist and so forth. And so it's that collective understanding that everyone is going to be a target in the future. Therefore, we organize, and we learn from that. And our Muslim community has to engage other communities to build coalitions so that we can promote these issues in a way that mainstream America can appreciate. And so we need to engage. So I encourage that, and I also encourage those who are who are not of the Muslim community to engage those from the Muslim community, because it was heartening to many Muslim communities to see people from other faith communities come to their support to protect their mosques after 9/11, and to come to say, what can we do in these cases where we feel that you are being targeted just because of you being a Muslim. So I encourage that as well. At this point, what I would like to do is we'll do a 5-minute break. It'll allow you at least to begin to look at that. You can also get some of our literature. We do have pledge forms for those who want to donate. We also have a box for those who have petty cash and want to donate that way. We also have a sign-up sheet for our newsletter, which is weekly. And I encourage everyone to go to our website, which is civilfreedoms.org. If you look at that website, we take all of the most important articles and media that is being generated regarding our three initiatives, which are preemptive prosecution, profiling, and prisoners' conditions, and look at our website, because those are important to identifying and documenting what's happening in the United States and how it may be affecting Muslims now, but it's going to affect others later. So I encourage people to sign up to our newsletter as well. And so if we can break for 5 minutes, we'll be back in 5 minutes. So please don't,
I have a question.
don't go away. Yes?
I have a question. Do you think the NCPCF would be open to like bringing some kind of public forum for because of exculpatory evidence? If the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office is withholding exculpatory evidence and they're fabricating evidence and they're doing illegal acts like that, can it be exposed to having a public forum?
That's exactly what we're working on right now through the proposed legislation. We have a bill that is being introduced to Congressman Conyers of Michigan, and we're looking now for a Republican counterpart to co-sponsor the bill. And basically, it's to call upon the Department of Justice to implement the recommendations of the Inspector General, who documented the fact that there have been violations of these national security cases where evidence has been withheld. So we're working on that. We welcome anyone who's interested in that to speak to me, and I will entertain any of your suggestions and your willingness to work with us on that level. In terms of locally, we want to try to get you to talk to your congressmen and your senators here so that we can push it from here as well. I hope that answers the question. Our next segment, we're going to devote attention to the families, the families of those who are victims of preemptive prosecution, the situation of the prisoners and their families. And we believe this is important because you can hear it directly from people who are either family members or very close to the family members. And hopefully there will be also time for question and answers regarding this segment as well. And to begin, I'm going to introduce Kazi Tour. And Kazi Tour is a former political prisoner, longtime community organizer, and freedom fighter. Kazi was the first new African convicted of seditious conspiracy in the United States, for which he served nearly 10 years in prison. He relates to the words of Gil Scott-Heron. For those who may not know Gil Scott-Heron, he was probably the first of the rappers. He said, "I have believed in my convictions and have been convicted for my beliefs. Conned by the Constitution and harassed by the police. I've been billed for the Bill of Rights and been treated like I was wrong." He has served as co-chair for the National Jericho Movement, working for freedom for all political prisoners. He is currently a paralegal and trial consultant for the law offices of Barry P. Wilson. He is continually struggling for the liberation of all oppressed people worldwide. Kazi Tour.
I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank the organization for inviting me here to speak today. And I really like the work that you people are doing, and encourage you to keep it up. I was arrested in February 7th, 1982, in an arrest area outside of on 93 down here. Police that stopped us, they stopped the car. We put him on the stand, and we asked him, why did he stop our car? He said, "I wasn't used to seeing black people sitting in this rest area." So we asked him, well, how many, had you seen before? He said, well, I 4 or 5. I said, how many did you stop and search? And he's on the stand. He said 4 or 5. So you mean to tell me you stopped and searched every black person you saw coming in this rest area? And he said, yeah, of course. Like, he said he was the only one that wouldn't let me search him. So I got arrested. But as far as I could tell, we have a right not to be searched illegally. And one of the points that I learned from that is a lot of people don't stand up for themselves. Because if the 4 or 5 people had stood up before me, maybe I wouldn't have got arrested. Because I'm going to stand up for mine. And you people need to stand up for yours. I was beat down that night, locked up, and then took to the state police station, beat down again. They stood on my face and grounded their boots in my face like they were putting out cigarette butts. Then, in jail, what they do is they strip you down and start spinning the revolvers through the bars and saying, we're going to have an accident here, nigga, tonight. This is the stuff they try to put in you, the fear they try to put in you to not stand up and resist. So, through a lot of illegal moves, things that went down. I got moved about 40 times to 40 different institutions. I was in isolation for 3 years for organizing inside. And one time, what they do, they tell you in isolation, you want this tray, you want this food, get up on the bed, roll over, and sit up. I thought the next thing you were going to say is bark like a dog. It's like, man, I don't want nothing that bad. So this went on for 13 days. And I had to get a court order to be fed. But I tell you this just because you have to understand what them Muslim prisoners going through inside. Anybody who dares to stand up and resist this country, that's the treatment you get. And now that they got this waterboarding and all that, it's legal, and Obama just continue pushing this whole thing on torture, that's what's going on inside. It started out with the Native Americans, continue with African people, and we say New African because we came from many different tribes, many different nations in Africa. And once we reached here, we made up a new African community, a new African nation that's been treated separate, different, ever since we come to these shores, within a nation. And our community's been destroyed. We got people running around here waving American flags, talking about they American citizens, with no equal rights. How can you be a citizen? How? If you don't have equality, you're second class, man. It's just the way it is. I didn't make it that way. That's the way it is. And so, this repression, I'll tell you one other thing. In 2004, they had open surveillance on me and a lot of other people. And they didn't even care to try to hide it. They were following us everywhere we went with helicopters and all kinds. We had to have press conference to, expose what they were doing. And took down the license plates and they all go back to New York. They go to different people all around the country. It's all Homeland Security stuff, right? But we got more police in this country, man. In Boston, one time I was researching and I think there's something like 23 different police departments here. There's cops everywhere, man. This is a police state. And fascism is what it is, what's going on in this country. And people are afraid to talk about race and racism and, so repression is not limited to your community. It's more to anyone who wants to resist this government's foreign and national policy and domestic policy and their actions. They're going to try and look what they do in Haiti. Haiti never got up after Tucson. Haiti never got up. They never let them people up, man, because they dare to resist U.S. oppression. But that's what, I really like what's going on here, though. I mean, people building a tight community. But one thing I just have to stress is, like, in our work, we have to encompass all the people. And some of the people are being left out. When we go out to do organizing, do education work, we're not reaching those gangbangers, those people that are out there shooting each other. They ain't in here, And I don't know, but I think they need to be educated too. The year I got out of prison in 1991, 10,000 black youth killed 10,000 black youth in this country. The height of lynching in 1919, 2,000. They lynched 2,000. The Klan lynched 2,000 of us that year in 1919. In 1991, we done killed 10,000 ourselves. Man, we got to reach them. They got to know who their friends are, and they got to know who their enemies are. And the enemy is not us, not each other.
Thank you for that, Brother Kazi. I'm going to ask Layla to come up here and introduce our next speaker. And by the way, Layla Murad is a 21-year-old Muslim organizer based in the Boston area and a central figure in the Tariq Muhanna Support Committee, where organizing currently has a focus on the struggle to defend and liberate Muslim and all political prisoners. Layla's work actively reflects her support for the resistance and self-determination of other peoples and communities in their own struggles, including but not limited to the defense of their land, resources, and bodies. Layla Murad.
The next speaker is Marlene Jenkins. Marlene Jenkins is from New York City, where she worked as an RN at St. Luke's Hospital and at NYU. She and her husband worked closely with Malcolm X in the 1950s and early 60s. Marlene has 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. She relocated to Albany in 1996, where her daughter was working for the Court of Appeals. Marlene is a long-term foster parent who has won awards for her commitment to working with difficult children. She works with the Center for Law and Justice, the Muslim Solidarity Committee, and Project Salam. Marlene's son, Tariq Shah, a well-known jazz bassist who played at President Clinton's inaugural in 1996, was entrapped in an unfair FBI sting operation and is serving 15 years sentence.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Marlene Jenkins, and I'm the mother of Tariq Shah. In 2005, 3 months after 9/11, on December 2001, the FBI directed an agent provocateur to go after a Muslim named Farheen Islamic Bookstore in New York City, and said that he wanted to send money to a jihadist brother overseas. Farheen refused to help, but referred the provocateur to Tariq Shah, which is my son, a well-known jazz bass player, self-defense trainer, and martial arts teacher in New York City, who played at President Clinton's inauguration. Tariq did nothing, but the provocateur, Mohammed Alansi, continued to try to get Tariq to do something illegal for 3 years. He was reportedly paid $100,000 for his work. In a bizarre twist in 2004, Alansi set himself on fire outside of the White House. Alansi's FBI handler, Robert Fuller, was also in charge of the Newburgh 4 case in 2009 and 2010, and was implicated in the rendition and torture of Canadian citizen Mahar Arar in 2002 and 2003. In 2003, the FBI assigned another agent provocateur, Theodore Shelby. aka Saeed, an ex-convict and former Black Panther, to get Tariq Shelby. Shelby asked Tariq to give him music lessons and eventually moved into our home, which I had a house in the Bronx, and Tariq was staying and taking care of it, tape recording every conversation. Shelby then introduced Tariq to a supposed Al-Qaeda recruiter who was actually an undercover agent, and I guess you've heard of this guy because he's been all over TV, Ali Sufan, who offered Tariq $1,000 a week if he would agree to train jihadists in martial arts. Tariq agreed, although he did not accept any money. Sufan then recruited an old friend of Tariq, Dr. Rafiq Sabir, a physician, to provide medical assistance to injured combatants. Sabir, who lived at that time in Florida, was in town visiting Tariq. The New York Times wrote that the tapes revealed a plot that was almost entirely taught, no weapons appeared to have been bought, and no martial art training took place. The plot went on for 2 years and became a joint FBI New York Police Department sting operation. Tariq was then arrested in 2005. At his arrest, Tariq was refused legal representation, was threatened with the Patriot Act and rendition. Neither his attorney nor his family, we could not find him for more than 3 days after his arrest. He was finally able to get some legal counsel. Behind his trial, Tariq agreed to talk in a wiretap conversation to a former martial arts student, Mahmoud Brent, who he also taught martial arts to, about Brent's attendance at a training camp in Pakistan after a 9/11 run by Lashkar-e-Taiba, a terrorist group designated thus by the U.S. government in 2001 that was fighting for the independence of Kashmir. However, once Tariq was wired and taken to Maryland for the phone call, he refused to cooperate. Then the FBI became very annoyed with him, and Tariq was then taken and held in solitary confinement at Metropolitan Correctional Center for more than 33 months. Facing a 30-year sentence and realizing that he could not get a fair trial and would be found guilty by association, he pleaded guilty in April of 2007 to 1 count of conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Farheen pleaded guilty for similar reason and was sentenced to 13. Brent also pleaded guilty and received 15 years for his attendance at the training camp. Sabir, who pleaded not guilty, was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. He was sentenced to 25 years just because he said he was a physician and that he would treat the enemy. Tariq, who is now 47, is serving his sentence at the medium security federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia, and is scheduled for release in June 2018. He has never in his life advocated violence. He is not a terrorist. He pleaded guilty to save his family astronomical legal fees and to have some life remaining to him to spend with us upon his release. Like the Virginia pinball conviction, the government fastened on an innocent activity in Tariq's case. His practice of martial arts and said it was evidence of terrorist activity. But any such activity was suggested and facilitated only by the FBI, provocateur, and agents, not Tariq. The New York Times wrote that the government has acknowledged that neither Mr. Shaw nor the 3 others accused in the case were on the verge of any violence. I became a Muslim under Malcolm X. Tariq was his whole life, he wanted to be a musician. At the age of 13, he asked me to buy him a bass. From that moment, his passion was music only. He surrounded himself with the best musicians, always practicing, was always interested in martial arts since he was taught by his father. And at an adult age, he opened a martial arts studio in Harlem and was well known by the community. The schools would call on him for help when some of the boys were totally out of control. They were very pleased with his results because he would always let them know that martial arts was discipline, not for violence. Also in the same area, Rafiq Sabir, a well-known friend and physician in Harlem, had a storefront, free clinic, treating all who could not afford to pay. They were partners in helping the community. In all of his 48 years, Tariq had never ever been involved in any type of violence. He had never been arrested. His main focus was music and becoming a better musician. So when the government pictured him as a dangerous martial arts terrorist, I was wondering who the hell were they talking about? Tariq always opened his home to others and was always willing to help others. I used to tell him, though, that be careful, because everyone you give the greetings to does not mean peace be upon you. He was a trusting, beloved person and always wanted for his brothers what he wanted for himself. So with all of that, he was truly deceived by an informant who he trusted, gave music lessons for over 2 years, opened his home. This person continued to give him and continued to give this person bass lessons. The government continuing coercion and entrapment for more than 3 years, using more than one informant, and Robert Fuller, the same FBI used in the Newburgh 4 case and many others. I believe he was also used in the Fort Dix 5. We must continue, and if we don't continue now to fight against all these manufactured stings and entrapment cases, my son, other sons, year after year will be entrapped. They will have to plead guilty to crimes they have not committed, and there will never be any fair trials. They will all wind up in some sort of solitary confinement, constantly cut off from the outside world. This is truly mental torture and is a great tool for anyone to take a plea deal, just for some kind of normalcy. I am here not all just for my son. I am here for many other sons and for many of the young brothers and sisters who have been entrapped in these government stings. I ask all of us to get together and to do what we can to help, because if we don't speak out, these young brothers and sisters cannot speak out. They are in prison and they have been sealed. Their mouths have been sealed. It's harder for them they can't defend themselves. They can't speak out against others, because the more that they say, the worse that their sentences will be. So we as a people, we are the only ones that can really help them. We are the only ones that can fight for them. They put fear in us, but fear is not going to help us to get ahead. I was born and raised in the civil rights area. We fought for everything that we have gotten today. My great-grandmother was a slave. She fought. My grandmother was also a hard worker, and she was living in the time of, when they were just always treating us like we were less than human. We fought through that, and we gained and we came ahead. We have now gone back 30 years because we don't want to fight for our freedom. No one is going to give us our freedom unless we fight for it ourselves. And we must stick together for our children and for others. That is the only way that we're going to get ahead and win this fight that is going on now. So I thank all of you for coming and listening.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Jenkins. Our next speaker is Dr. Tariq Muhanna, born in Virginia to Egyptian parents. Dr. Tariq Muhanna is the brother of Muslim prisoner Dr. Tariq Muhanna. And Tamir currently resides in Boston, Massachusetts, where he works in the pharmaceutical and biotech management consulting industry. When his brother was arrested in 2009, Dr. Mohanna rallied the support of thousands of people with the help of a group of associates that today constitute the Tariq Mohanna Support Committee. The committee is the core steering group for the Free Tariq campaign, a broad-based grassroots movement to bring greater attention not only to the true facts and realities of the case against his brother Tariq, but also to the cases of other Muslims who face similar circumstances in the United States without their own support mechanisms. Dr. Mohanna.
Assalamu alaikum and salutations. I'm going to break my discussion into two different parts. The first part I'll talk about Tariq, and the second part I'll talk about everything else. So Tariq, just a quick update for those who are unaware, his court date, the beginning of his trial rather, was moved from October 3rd. It was moved back 3 weeks to October 24th because the government has released an additional 16,000 documents that they refer to as evidence, but which we refer to as nonsense. But so alhamdulillah, Tariq, he's in very good spirits, and he's actually in better spirits and better physical health than he's been at any point in his life. So that's always positive, and my family is confident that things will go the way that we're looking for. I just want to point out some similarities between my brother Tariq and your son Tariq. As I was listening, and it's worth pointing out because I'll get to it. So in both cases we have somebody who refused to cooperate, and then you have the annoyed FBI, and then you have the arrest and the imprisonment for 33 months, and then the trial after already having served all this time in solitary confinement without even being convicted of anything. I want to just point out one thing with respect to plea deals. I think it's something that we should handle very carefully, because we're trying to organize a certain perspective here, which is that these individuals that we are trying to defend, we're trying to defend them because they're innocent. So it creates added confusion in the eyes of our audience, and our audience here is like the American public. Unfortunately, with a lot of these issues, they already seem there's a lot of misinformation out there. So the last thing that we want to do is add more confusion to that. Tariq always spoke to me about, his staunch stance never to take a plea deal, because it's not just about your case, it's about the cases that come after it, and it's the precedent that it sets, it's the perspective that it sets. But I think also the fact that a lot of our brothers take these plea deals, unfortunately, it just amplifies the fact that we need to do more in order to support them. Which brings me to another point now. The fact that we see this repetition here between, let's say, like Tariq's case and another Tariq's case, and then another Muslim brother's case or another African American brother's case. It's a very systematic process that is being put in place here, and you have to get to a point where you ask yourself, what is the message that is being sent to us here? When we're being treated like this in a systematic way, You know, and that's the point where you really need to start seeing the writing on the wall, because history repeats itself. You know, this is the problem with being somebody. I love reading. I love history. I love anthropology. Tata loves history and anthropology. Look where I put him. But maybe none of us should read. No, not that. But I mean, you know, the problem when you read is that you realize that history repeats itself, and so it's very frustrating to see it play out before your eyes again and again, and to see everybody around you who perhaps, you know, I mean, maybe they don't read history and anthropology, maybe they read Sports Illustrated, maybe they read whatever, you know, but it's frustrating to see that play out again and again, and like it feels like a madhouse, to be honest. It feels like a madhouse to see prisoner after prisoner put away. And no alarm going off in the minds of black Muslims. No alarm. Yesterday, I came to pray Jummah here. And I asked a while ago if we could hold an event for awareness for Tariq here. And I received a very polite response, but nonetheless, it was still a denial. And my brother, he's facing life in prison. Based on what? Based on conspiracy charges. Listen to the list of charges, the litany of charges. Conspiracy is charge number 1. Charge number 2 is conspiracy to provide material support to a terrorist. Conspiracy to commit terrorism, excuse me. And then the third charge is conspiracy to provide material support to a terrorist organization. It's absurd that these types of things can happen, and that they do happen, and they happen repeatedly, and they happen systematically, and that nobody says or does anything. You know, I'm very glad to see all these faces here, you know, alhamdulillah, and I appreciate everybody coming. But I can't help thinking to myself, and I was telling this to Brother Hashmi over in the restaurant over there, if this was a mass fundraiser, I imagine there would be maybe 10 to 20 times as many chairs, and they would all be full. And keep in mind, a fundraiser, you're paying to get in. The food isn't free. You're probably paying a $50 ticket or more. Look at us here. We have free food here, and you don't have to pay to get in the door. And yet, you know, it's this clear benefit for you to know what's going on. But people are just, it's very challenging to, you know, to awaken in people's minds the threat that exists to them when they are not prepared to accept it. Yesterday I came and prayed Jummah here, as I was saying, and again, having received that denial previously, I sat there as I was listening to the khutbah, and I was listening to, and the khatib, you know, he was talking about how we need to introduce righteousness into our lives. And how, not just in writing, not just in speech, but in action, you know, that is the right thing to do. To do right. I think they call it orthopraxy. You know, because they say that Christianity is a religion of orthodoxy, which is correct belief, and Islam is a religion of orthodoxy and orthopraxy, correct belief and correct action. And that's not saying anything against Christianity, it's just a distinction that's important to note. And so, as I was sitting there listening to the khutbah, I was like, what is the right thing to do as my brother has been sitting in solitary confinement for 703 days. 703 days for what? They say that he translated a book. He translated many books. You know, I mean, if we're sitting in a civilized society here, we're rational people. You know, there's a difference between one person who translates one book with a title like that and a person who translates 50 books where that's one of the titles. You see, and if the book isn't illegal in Arabic, why should it be illegal in English? I mean, I went into a bookstore the other day and somebody had written a book about where they translated all of the messages of, like, you know, Osama bin Laden and all them. Barnes and Nobles. I'll expect to see that guy on the stand soon. But so anyway, I was sitting there and I was thinking about this, and I felt that I had to do something. I had to introduce that righteousness into my life. And what I basically did was, right after the prayer was over, the prayer was here. I was actually sitting right there, and the hall is full of people. There's hundreds of people, and I stood up and I gave an announcement about Tariq's case and about this event, and I really I implored people to come, not for Tariq's sake, but for their own sake. But again, despite the fact that we got a very strong response here today, I'm very happy to see people here again today. But to see the response yesterday, you would have thought it would be greater. And I'm not disappointed, because this isn't something that they would do for me or for Tariq. This was, and I told them so, this was an opportunity for them to introduce that righteousness into their lives. But again, if people aren't prepared to do that, then they're not prepared to do that. And so that takes me back into the question of what are we really struggling for here? Who are we struggling for, and what are we struggling against? The tide is very strong here, and we have to ask ourselves where the will to change that tide is really coming from. Where is that will coming from? Who wants to change that tide? Is it just us, or the people that we're trying to save? And I'm not talking about your Tariq and my Tariq. I'm talking about let's say me as a Muslim, the Muslim community. Do they want to be saved? Do they want to be saved? Who are we saving them from? I was in Washington, D.C. for an Islamic convention. And, you see the same litanies that are being proliferated as they were 10 years ago. Nothing has changed. We're still in the Stone Age. That we're the nice guys, there's extremists over there, they're radicals. Yasser Qadhi saying this. And it's funny, because by creating that distinction, that polar distinction, we're okay and they're radicals, he himself is kind of behaving as a radical himself. He's polarizing, the conflict. When in fact, these people that they claim to be, that they call radicals, they're not, what they are? They're not radicals. Unfortunately, they're Muslim youth who desperately needed to have the proper leadership among the Muslim American leadership. You can't go and be a Muslim American leader and sit there saying we have our rights and we can exercise our rights when you have the Tariqs who are being utterly deprived of their rights. And you can't even forget about what's happening with the Muslims. The history of this nation, unfortunately, it's always been like that. This is the way it is when there's government. It's not just America. It's when there is that system in place. The rules apply when those in power want them to apply. So you can't go and tell the Muslim youth here that don't worry, you're safe here. You have your freedom of speech. You have those rights. You can't say that. Now, I'm not saying that there's no hope. Because I don't want people to walk away from this thinking that I'm saying that there's no hope. But what I'm saying is that Muslim leaders, and I don't think this will happen, unfortunately. Maybe somebody's more optimistic than I. What would be ideal is that they should address the facts. They should present, the Muslim youth who are trying to learn their identity in a post 9/11 world. Sorry, 60 seconds. They should tell these youth the truth about their religion, and they should equip them to engage in spirited debate about it. They should not make them run away from it, because the tide will only rise. Even if you run away from it, it'll only rise. And at this point, I'm wondering, what are our options for that? Me personally, sadly, I think that I'm ready to fold. I think that my family can live a pleasant life overseas, and there's no need to risk that. It's not about, I'm sorry, 30 seconds. It's not about escaping it. It's not about escaping it, but it's about finding where you belong and being in a space where you can work alongside people who where you can have coalitions that are actually like, you know, willing to change it. You know, like what we're doing is very brave here, but we need to have greater infrastructure. We need to have that buy-in from down below. And what we're doing is right, but there will.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tamid. I just want to briefly comment. We bring the families to speak because we want you to understand what they're going through. And we don't like to come to a community where family members feel that they're not supported by the community. And if I may, you know, if I may impress on this committee or go beyond my bounds, I really, this community, I really, you know, encourage you to adopt the case for what the case is. Everyone deserves a fair trial. Everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And those are the things that we need to rally around. And we encourage local communities to support these cases and the family. And Brother Tamir and his family shouldn't have to feel the way that they feel. Now, all of the speakers who have been here today have a right to their views. Not everything that they say reflects our views as NCPCF on a given situation, on a given issue. For example, we don't encourage people to pick up and leave the U.S. because the Muslim community is targeted, for example. And I know where Dr. Tamid is coming from when he says that, but obviously we're here to empower and encourage those who are here to prevent that from happening to other people. And that's, we feel, is our job as Muslims. Because for Muslims, it's not where you live, but it's the peace it's your heart being at peace wherever you are. Because on the day of judgment, we will all face God as individuals. So I understand where Dr. Tamid is coming from. I just want you to know that we support you as NCPCF. We support your family, and we support Tariq's right to a fair trial. We oppose any egregious or any violations of law by our government, by law enforcement, by individuals in all of these cases, including yours. I just want you to know that we don't determine the outcome of these cases, and we don't, support any individual case, but we support the three initiatives that we talked about. There will be time, inshallah, for questions and answers, so I'm sure Brother Tariq will have an opportunity, Brother Tamid. Let me just introduce our final speaker. Sister Sharmeen Siddiqui is the sister of Ihsanul, quote-unquote, Shifa Siddiqui, who was unjustly prosecuted in Atlanta, Georgia, and currently held in the Communication Management Unit in Marion, Illinois. Sharmeen is currently preparing to conduct her dissertation research in socio-cultural anthropology on the impact of the United States government's war of terror on Muslim American youth, activism, and Islam. She enjoys photography and paintings and exhibited artworks in the South and Midwest. Sharmeen serves as a member on the steering committee of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace, everybody. So I'm going to read a little excerpt. So every few hours, I kept distracting my mother from reciting the Quran when we were driving to visit my brother Shifa last July at the federal prison in Marion, Illinois, which houses one of the two Muslim internment camps in the U.S. During our 10-hour drive from Michigan, I kept trying to find out when she was going to be finished with her recitation so I could listen to some music. I know what you all are thinking, but it was nasheed. At one point, a little agitated, my mother reacted. We're going to see Shifa after a long time. You need to pray that we can see him. It's a long drive. We need to make sure that we face no problem in our journey, and the prison gives us no trouble. My mother was sitting in the front passenger seat, gesturing with her hands in distress. She continued, We're not there for him always. This is our only chance to see him. I'm reciting so Allah will help us in our journey, so we can see him without any problem. Looking anxious, she continued to tell me, I don't know how he's doing, what he eats there. I'm not there for him anymore. I can't call him, send him food. I can't hug him at the prison. I'm praying that he is all right and we can see him. Fast forward to the visitation room. With a stretching smile and the longest Muslim greeting in Arabic, my brother Shifa welcomed us. My mother, my sister, who flew in from Atlanta, Georgia, and me. In the visitation room where a plexiglass window separated him from us as we spoke over the phones. This is how we usually held our face-to-face visitation with him. In watery eyes, my mother asked Shifa about his well-being. Abu, an affectionate term for sons. Abu, have you had breakfast this morning? What did you have? Alhamdulillah, I had breakfast. Alhamdulillah, meaning praise be to God. Shifa replied. My mother looked at him again and said, did you sleep well last night? Smiling, Shifa answered, Alhamdulillah. Do you need anything? Has your sister been sending you money regularly? My mother probed. With a radiant smile, my brother Shifa responded, Alhamdulillah, me. I'm in the care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing to worry. A sequence of routine questions followed from my mother. Have you bought any items from the commissary, from the canteen? How much money do you have left? Do they give you fruits and vegetables with your meal every day? How is the temperature in your room? Is it normal? As always, Shifa answered with Alhamdulillah. My mother then asked if we could get him something from the vending machine. He didn't want anything. She offered to buy him some cookies, chips, soda. He declined again. She then looked at me and my sister, and raising her voice a little, she said, why don't you get him something? Why are you guys sitting here? He doesn't want anything, I replied. My mother countered. He doesn't want anything because you haven't bought him anything. Besides, these are all junk food, I added. Noticing a tension brewing, my brother interjected with a smile. I don't want anything, Ammi. Alhamdulillah, I'm fine. Breaking into tears, my mother begged him to eat something. Eat something, Abu. You're looking paler than the last time I saw you. Your cheeks have sunken in. I know you won't eat anything they give you. They don't let me bring any food for you. Her voice cracked as she looked at him in anguish and sobbed. If I was here with you, I would cook for you every day. This is all I can do for you. Tell your sister to get you something. I don't know when I will see you again. Will I be ever able to make your favorite dishes? Only Allah knows when I will be back again. Let me get you something. Weeping, my mother insisted on feeding her son something, anything. I don't know whether being able to feed her son something quenched the emptiness my mother felt from having unjustly lost her son to prison. I don't know a mother seeing her son eat something before her eyes, satisfied or fulfill the need a mother feels to take care of her son or a child. My mother's connection to Shifa, my little brother, went back to the moments where my parents, standing in the desert of Arafah in Saudi Arabia in 1985, invoked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them a son. It was a much deeper spiritual connection my mother felt with her little son when Allah blessed her by fulfilling her prayers, deepening their connection incomprehensible by others. This relationship was more intensified when Shifa, as an infant, developed chronic asthma and breathing problems to the point where he had to be fed with tubes through his nostrils. His little delicate and fragile body was wrapped and constricted with tubes, making us worry whether he was going to survive. My mother spent sleepless nights and days crying, making sure she was always there for him, ensuring he was breathing and alive. We had all, especially my mother, developed a special bond with my little brother Shifa as a result. My brother Shifa was kidnapped by the Bangladeshi military at the behest of our US government when he and his wife were returning home from shopping 12 days after their wedding in April of 2006. He was kept in an undisclosed location in a military camp and missing for 4 days before the FBI brought him back to New York in a secret Sierra rendition aircraft, and we learned about his whereabouts from CNN. He used to translate Islamic literature from Arabic to English for a Muslim publication website. Photos from his tourist trips, online chats of teenagers concerned about Muslims and oppressed people in the world and their feeling of responsibility were used against him as evidence in his case. The prosecutor, at the opening and closing statement, informed the court and confirmed at the conclusion of the trial that there was no plot or plan to destroy any cities or building anywhere in the world, that there were no weapons of mass destruction. In fact, the prosecutors admitted my brother never came close to or had an access to such instruments. Silence and shocked for a month from the news of my brother's kidnapping and arrest, my mother broke down one day, shedding tears of pain and confusion during our 12-hour drive from New York City to Michigan after my brother's first bail hearing in Brooklyn, New York. We started driving after Fajr, dawn prayer, when the pastel rose morning sky began to breeze in. After reciting Surah Yasin and Surah Rahman, 2 chapters from the Quran, she raised her hands up in the air, beseeching Allah to have mercy on her family, her beloved son, and asking for his release. She cried profusely, invoking Allah, shifting her sitting positions in the front passenger seat every now and then. Sometimes the palms of her hands closely pressed her cheeks, water running between her fingers. Sometimes she hunched over in agony, covering her face with her arms, drenching her clothes with tears. And sometimes she raised her hands up in the air, reciting prayers in Arabic and Bengali, her grief and despair streaming down her face. Other times she wiped her tears and nose with her scarf or shirt or tissue, pressuring her palms against her cheeks so deeply like she was hurting herself. Her voice broke between loud and soft, painful sounds of imploring Allah for forgiveness and freedom for her son and for all the sons imprisoned unjustly. 12 hours of supplication between her 5 worshipping times in the car. I could have sworn her despair, finding no space, burst out of my car to the calm green mountains that surrounded us driving through northwestern Pennsylvania, summoning the leaves in the trees to pray with her for her son. Her anguish ruptured the sky in the late afternoon that day, making me angry at the injustice meted out to her, telling her in cloudburst that it is in solidarity with her. I had no words to comfort my mother that day. My mother then started fasting for over a year until she developed new health illnesses. But it was more like she was punishing herself by withholding food from her body in her inability to be there for her son. How could she enjoy food when her son could not have the same food or have an adequate meal? This is the nature and the impact of US government's violence on my mother, encroaching on her female body and invisibly punishing her and her family. She is, however, not the only one enduring this violence. You've heard Marlene, another mother before me. I cannot understand or articulate what a mother feels for her child or the nature of the center of her pain. But I have seen how my mother and many mothers in this situation loved and grieved for their children unjustly imprisoned. How does a mother fulfill her role of motherhood and maintain a mother-child relationship when a child is imprisoned? How does a mother nurture a child when incarceration makes it impossible to take care or be there for the child? How does a parent, especially mothers, who are assumed to be caregivers, fulfill this role when they are also stigmatized and labeled as being the relative of a terrorist when the child has not committed any acts of terrorism as proven by the court of law? What ambiguous position my mother and all the mothers occupy in society as a result of the violence of US government on these Muslim mothers and their families. But we don't acknowledge these aspects. Because if we are to acknowledge the violence committed by the US state on Muslim mothers, we also have to recognize the pain of these mothers and their love for their imprisoned children. And if we do this, then we have to affirm the humanity of their children, the human worth of the young Muslim men and women unjustly preemptively incarcerated. This is how our government has been waging its violence against Muslim mothers or prisoners. So when CNN broke the news of my brother's whereabouts, many relatives and friends stopped communicating with us for fear, distrust, or perhaps confusion. But on that day, a non-Muslim woman, a professor from a local university we have known for some time, she came over and stayed with my mother the entire day, talking and comforting her. My mother was amazed by how this woman prayed, performing the bodily movements of the prayers with her when she offered her daily worships. So in this audience, there are mothers, victims. There's a mother here with us whose son is currently incarcerated in Boston, Tarek Mahannad, whom we have heard about. I wonder how she and her family are coping with the circumstances. I wonder what the contour of her pain is from having a child unjustly imprisoned. I wonder how many people here offered or would like to offer her support and stand in solidarity with her. Jazakallah khair.
I think something needs to be clarified real quick. That indeed wisdom is not in running away from your problems. So that is, Ashraf and I are actually in agreement that the pack up your bags and leave option is not recommended. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, and I'm looking downstream here. I'm not looking at like how we can save the daughters. I'm looking at like our communities that are in, increasing jeopardy as time moves forward. These communities that we're trying to save. We need to be realistic and methodical in assessing like how ready are they to be saved, because like it's not simply like you're a fireman who comes and scoops up like the old lady to save her. You need to have people be prepared to invest in their own liberation. It can't just be the few, it does need to be the collective, and we need to have people, we need to ask ourselves, are people ready to invest in their own liberation? It has to be like everybody. It can't just be one person. So I am hopeful, but I think that perhaps there are additional things that we need to add to like strategies that we're using in order to like maximize our resources and our potential.
Anyone else on that topic? And if you can be brief.
I will, but I'll let my sisters speak.
Thank you. Sisters, you can go for Brother Qazi.
I'll just like, I go back and the sister was talking about we went backwards 30 years, I think one of the key things here for us to do is we have to understand the history of struggle and movements of this country, what struggles we've gone through, what things we won, how we won them. Some tactics can't be used anymore, and some things were done that were clear mistakes and people ended up in jail, some of those tactics. But throughout, we were in the black community here, we've had, we'll go back to Garvey, Du Bois, Booker T. There was three-pronged struggle. Du Bois was for talent 10th. Booker T was for trades and teaching people how to learn trades. And Garvey was back to Africa, right? And then there was the next wave comes up. It was Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the Panther Party. Three prongs. One got legitimized, the peaceful nonviolent movement. Martin Luther King got legitimized, and the Panther Party movement got criminalized, and people got sent to jail. But the lesson in that is our community allowed them to split us. You see, they split us, and they let those political prisoners in the Panther Party stay in jail. And a lot of them are still in jail today. And if you got a movement that's divided like that, they win. We see, you can look around the world at other movements that are not divided. Like in Ireland, the IRA and Sinn Féin. Like in South Africa, we had the ANC and Mkhonto we Sizwe. They always had two-pronged approach. They had armed struggle, and they had the above board, doing the organizing in the community. So, like I said before, we can't, as a wheel, the spokes, we can't eliminate one of the spokes and let that go. The wheel's going to be wobbly. It's not going to work. It's got to be a whole movement.
Thank you. Other questions, please?
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to the same question. Just based on our experience in Albany, we didn't have a wonderful victory because Yassine and Muhammad got sent to prison for 15 years. But I do know for a fact that if our community had come together and organized, they would be doing 30 years, because that was the bottom of the sentencing guidelines for them. And it was all the support from the community, the people coming to court, the letters, the petitions, the vigils we had every week that saved 15 years of their sentence. So, you do what you can. If you don't come together, and we would have had more cases in Albany, and the president of the mosque, Shamshad Ahmad, probably would have been targeted as well if we hadn't worked with him substantially. And so, you don't see all the cases you prevent from organizing. So it's a whole lot better if you do stand up and organize, and that's the only way things are going to get better.
We're going to have our final portion of the program. I'm going to ask Brother Maury Salakhan to come forward to take his seat. Thank you so much for your patience. Please don't forget to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, those who are interested in becoming members, we have a membership form, and you can get information on membership on our website at civilfreedoms.org, civilfreedoms with an S.org. Our second to last speaker is Brother Maury Salakhan. Al-Hajj Maury Salakhan is a metropolitan Washington, D.C. based human rights advocate, author, lecturer, and poet. He's done a lot of other things. He just wanted me to stop it there, but I hope some of you have already heard or seen the work of Brother Maury, so I will leave the floor open to him.
I'm going to ask my brother Ayub and the brother sitting next to him, inshallah, to come and just hold this for a couple of minutes. So I just want you all to get a look at this. Okay. So, stretch it all the way out. Stretch it all the way out, inshallah, so the brothers and sisters can really get a good look at this. I was asked to speak on the importance of Muslims working in coalition with non-Muslims. And I'm just going to say something about that very, very, very briefly, because really that's not the challenge. Muslims working in coalition with non-Muslims is not the challenge. The real challenge is Muslims being able to work in coalition with other Muslims. This banner is a banner that was produced by a non-Muslim. And when he presented this banner to me, I knew very little about, in fact, when he presented the banner to me, I knew nothing about the gentleman by the name of Max. I knew nothing about Max. I had met him very briefly, and he surprised me when he gave me this a year ago. It was at the September 11th demonstration, counter demonstration by primarily by the non-Muslim community. You know, if you remember a year ago, September 11th, some of the leading Islamophobes in the country were beating the drums. They were beating the drums for this big demonstration that we're going to have in Manhattan. And subhanAllah, the counter demonstration that was organized in response to that demonstration ended up being much bigger. And 99%, well, not 99%, we did better than that. I like to say 80% of the 8 out of 10 of the individuals that were there at that demonstration were non-Muslims. About 20% were Muslims. And alhamdulillah, it was big, and it was after that demonstration ended that Max walked up to me and he said, "I have something for you." And I tell you, when I opened it up, I got chills. Now, to tell you something about Max, he had heard me here. Max is an itinerant farmer in upstate New York. He's an itinerant farmer. He works on a farm in upstate New York. He's not a wealthy man. He did this out of his own pocket and out of his own concern for this woman that he heard about for the first time, I believe, at a peace conference that was held in Albany, New York, a 2 or 3 day peace conference at a hotel in New York. I was one of the speakers, and he heard me speak about the case of Afia Siddiqui, and he was so outraged that he felt he needed to do something. And roughly about a month or two later, there was another forum that was held at a law school in New York City, at New York University Law School, and he was present there again. He heard me speak about her case and other cases again, along with other activists that were there. Kathy was there, and Steve, and many others. And it was an excellent forum. And then, like I said, just a few months later, we meet at the end of a demonstration in Lower Manhattan, and he presents this to me. So that, in and of itself, that's good, brothers. You can lay it down or roll it up. That in and of itself is indicative of the value that comes with us forming alliances with non-Muslims who are just as concerned about the issues that are impacting this country on the civil liberties and human rights front as many of us are. They're just as concerned because they understand that if things continue on the trajectory they're on in this country, things are going to get much worse, not just for Muslims, but for the entire community, for the entire America. And this is extremely important, brothers and sisters, that we take this to heart, because Afia is off the radar screen. Yesterday I was at a large Islamic center in New York, a very large and, well-endowed Islamic center in New York. And at the end of what was a very touching khutbah, alhamdulillah, for Jummah, there was a beautiful dua made for many different prisoners, for many different issues. A dua, a prayer that was made for them and for countries that are in turmoil right now. Very beautiful dua. SubhanAllah, I was waiting until the end to hear where they reference Afia Siddiqui. And SubhanAllah, her name was not mentioned. And Afia spent 2 years, over 2 years in New York City after being brought back to the United States after being secretly detained overseas for 5 years. She was brought back to the United States and spent 2 years in pretrial confinement. Very horrendous, unconstitutional pretrial confinement in a very notorious detention center in Brooklyn, New York, before going on trial and then receiving a conviction despite all of the evidence in her favor. Being convicted and then given a sentence of 86 years. You would think that would have touched the conscience and would have raised flags of awareness and concern among many leaders and organizations in the New York area, but apparently it hasn't. We make dua. SubhanAllah, I often hear this, and it bothers me when I hear in America someone say, I will make dua, when we have the capacity to do so much more. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, when you see an evil action, you must change it with your hand. If you cannot do so with your tongue, the jihad of the tongue. If you cannot do so, detest it within your heart, and that is the weakest degree of faith. SubhanAllah, we have a problem just coming together the way that we should. And what I'm about to say, and those of you who know me, you know I don't mince words. I don't have time for it. I don't have patience for it. I don't have time or patience for mincing words, especially on occasions like this when we're dealing with very important issues, very sensitive and disturbing issues, and we have very little time to deal with, to work with. I don't mince words. This beautiful center, the largest center in Boston, the largest center in this area, in this metro area, and a center that was born out of controversy. A center that was born out of controversy and opposition. There were people in this country, Islamophobes, with a capital I, who did their very best to prevent this center from being built. And at the end of the day, by the grace and mercy of Allah Ta'ala, it was built, it was established. But now the question arises, not just for this center, but many other large centers around the country, brothers and sisters. Should we allow the very people who stood in the way of us establishing our institutions, should we allow them now to have veto power over our institutions? Should they be able to wield veto power from the shadows? No. The answer to that is no. And let me say, I'm speaking for myself. So if anyone gets angry with anyone, just get angry with Maurice Allah Khan. Just him. Nobody else. But I'm saying we should not allow the opposition to have veto power over what we do in our centers, in our masajid and centers, and around the country, all over the country. What I find over and over and over again is some of our largest, most well-established centers are reluctant to deal with issues that need to be dealt with. And subhanAllah, this hurts us. This hurts us. It does damage to the psyche, especially of young Muslims who are teetering on the edge. And this brings me to another point. We should not allow the FBI to have access to our masajid and centers. That's my opinion. We should not allow them to have access to our masajid and centers, especially given with what we know they do. Given what we know they do. I have 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to use these 5 minutes the best I can. And let me speak just for one of these minutes to our friends in the FBI. I have friends in quotes. Because I know they're listening. I know they're listening. SubhanAllah. And that's all right, because we have nothing to hide. We're not doing anything illegal. We are within our constitutional rights. We have nothing to hide. As an agency, I think this organization is sitting on the precipice of evil. I really, that's my opinion. That's my opinion. As an agency. I believe that within this agency, however, there are decent-minded, law-abiding professionals who want nothing more than to be able to do a good job and at the end of the day return safely home to their families. They are truly interested in providing security for this nation. I believe that there are those who are of this mind. But as an agency, as an institution, it is very corrupt because it's doing corrupt things. And because of the corruption and because of what they're doing to families, to individuals and families, they should not have carte blanche, open door policy entry into our centers and masajid. They shouldn't. Just as a matter of principle. But brothers and sisters, those of us who are here, and I want to end with some very specific recommendations. For those of us who are here, at the end of the day, what we have got to do is determine, those few of us that are here, what are we going to do with this information? What are we going to do with the fact that this NCPCF forum came to Boston, Massachusetts, to the Islamic Center that sits on Malcolm X Boulevard? I mean, that's tremendously symbolic. Malcolm X Boulevard. How many of us really understand who Malcolm X was and what he stood for? Just by the mere fact that this institution, which was born through controversy, is rooted on Malcolm X Boulevard, that should impose a certain amount of responsibility on our collective psyche. For those of us who are not involved, we need to become involved. And one of the most important ways you can do this is by becoming involved in the Tariq Mahana case. All over the country, I say to my brothers and sisters, if there is a case in your backyard, you have a responsibility to respond to it. If you don't, you are betraying what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Allah Azza wa Jal has instructed us to do. We are betraying it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, one of the best jihads is to speak truth to a governing authority that is deviated from the right way. This is what we can do in America. We can do this. And we must. We can do this. We can organize. We can push back in the court of public opinion within the realm of constitutional law and within the bounds of the Sharia. We can do this. And if we don't do it, it poses all kinds of difficult challenges for us. And it makes it easy for the provocateurs that are sent into communities like this to get the ear of these young brothers and sisters who feel a hunger to do something. They feel this burn to do something. And then the provocateur comes in and he identifies who it is that is expressing this desire to do something. He begins whispering in their ear, and oftentimes these provocateurs are being paid for by our government through the FBI. And when we don't stand up and we don't push back, what we're doing we're making it easier for the provocateurs to do exactly what they're doing. So we've got to push back. We must push back. And we must have the confidence. We must have the confidence to be able to stand. And at the end of the day to say, I am committed as a Muslim who advocates Islam. I am committed to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. May Allah bless us to be part of the solution. And I look forward to the Q&A if we have time for that, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, Brother Maury. And we're going to have our last speaker, last but not least. Sister Leda is going to introduce him.
I'm gonna introduce Imam Abdullah Farooq. Imam Abdullah Farooq is a native-born Bostonian, born of a Jamaican mother, Mrs. Jane Barrow and Clarence Lee from North Carolina, and has been Imam of the mosque for praising Allah since 1995. He has also served as a prison chaplain for the Massachusetts Department of Corrections for 9 years and is the Muslim spiritual advisor and chaplain at Northeastern University, a position he's held for 14 years. He is a past president of the Islamic Council of New England and presently the Amir of the Imams Shura Council of Greater Boston. Imam Abdullah made his pilgrimage to Mecca Hajj in 1993 and made Umrah with his wife in 2005. He is a father of both biological and adopted children and has 9 grandchildren. His goal as a Muslim leader is to help unite Muslims to do the work of establishing Islam as a complete way of life for the betterment of all people in Massachusetts and throughout America.
Assalamu alaikum, how are you all? Alhamdulillah, certainly the praise belongs to Almighty God Allah, and I praise Him and I give Him the credit that He is due as my Lord and my Creator. I'm very honored that I was invited to come and speak on behalf of, and I'm going to say the 2 people that I've come to know. The only thing that I have to lend to this forum, certainly Maurice Salakan is more aware of the national things that are going on that rip away the Constitution that is here to protect us as human beings, as American citizens. And this constitutional right is being ripped away. And this puts us all in danger. And so I'm coming here today to give you some personal testimony of 2 people that I know very well, that I've had time to put food in, that they've given me food to eat. And I've eaten with them. First, Afia Sadiq. Now Afia was a member of my masjid. She had the Dawah Resource Center there, and she spent a lot of time in that masjid providing and raising money to get books about Islam so that people could come and learn about what the religion of Islam means, not only from her own standpoint, but from original sources. She was a generous, and continues to be, I guess in her heart, the same generous soul that was concerned with the people of Bosnia to help raise money, and she was doing the work. This young lady, thin, frail, small, 5'1", 100 pounds pregnant, 100 pounds pregnant. This is the woman who they said picked up the machine gun and was threatening the soldiers. So I know her personally. I ate at her home. My wife and I, who was here, we ate from her hand. We listened to her speech, and I've watched her over a period of 10 years, nearly 10 years, as she graduated from, I believe, MIT, who had eaten in my home and I ate in her home. And this is the woman they say was a threat to the United States government. Goes to show you how weak the United States is. If they're going to target this young woman and beat her down and do the things that they're doing to her, this shows the weakness of our nation. And I'm here to advocate on her behalf. To say that, and knowing her personally, see, none of you knew her personally. And the government is speaking out against her, didn't know her personally, never ate with her, never heard her speech, never heard her soul. And so this is the woman that is now threatening the United States that they have to lock her up for 86 years. Can't send her home. After she's been wounded, shot down, and been, I don't know what other means she's been mistreated by, but I know her personally. And I'm here to speak to the American government, speak truth to the American government, in the court of public opinion, because you now have the opportunity to judge whether my testimony, whether she's right or wrong, whatever she's done, at least let the woman go home. What more can she do to you? But they're trying to send a message here to the people of the United States, and for you women and men who are gathered here today, that you should be weak and you should cower. You should kowtow to their authority. But never will we. Not if we want to speak the truth. Also, this young man, Tariq Mahana, who I came to know because he attended the masjid. He used to go to the meetings at Halakova, Northeastern University. The sweetest young man you'd ever want to know. Of course, he was spirited. He's concerned, as you are. I guess that's why you're here, for the concerns that are going on in the world. Why is the world the way it is today? Say all the Muslims were to disappear. Would that have changed Nagasaki or Hiroshima? Would it have changed Vietnam? Would the Muslims have blamed for that? No, the world is in the condition that we are right now, presently, because we refuse to obey God, and we want to put the Constitution, this one nation over God, we want to put this one nation over God, instead of being one nation under God. So that the Word of God has become weak, and is giving no fruit, and everything is permissible. Even the Constitution that they hold so dear now can be used against us, instead of being used for us, to protect our needs and our interests. And so we must be able to do, there are three things that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said. He said, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyiru biyadihi." Whoever sees a wrongdoing, he should change it with his hand. Now, we do not have the means, nor are we in the position, or should we have the mindset of being able to change things with our hands. That's not the position we are in. وَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And whoever can't do it, change something with his hand, she or he, then you should at least speak out against it. And if you can't even do that, to speak out against it, then you should hate it in your heart, at least that. فَبِقَلْبِهِ. What is in our hearts should at least have the concern for what is going on in America, that is being able to damage your rights. Okay, Tariq Mahana's gone and they've gotten him and they're going to destroy him. No, they won't. And I ask Allah to help us with it. His father's here, someone I've known for a few years. I knew your son long before I knew you. I believe that if the people would at least raise their voices, I got 5 minutes, at least to raise your voices, to write and to meet in halaqah concerning this, because we cannot let this nation just do whatever it wants and expect for it to find life and continual existence. This nation, by God, will be brought to its knees. They don't have to worry about any bombs, they don't have to worry about me blowing up anything, but Pharaoh is gone and Rome is gone, and many nations have gone before us that have found their demise because of their injustice. And so I call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma rabbana fansurna, first ila anfusina, over our own souls, wal fansurna ila qawmi kafirin. Now what are the kafirs? Now you can be white Christian in this room and you're not a kafir. because you believe in God and you put the word of God above the word of men. And anybody who's willing to follow the truth as they find it, as God expresses it to them, and not to be a denier, because kufr means denial. And much of our nation and much of us who are even Muslims are in a state of denial. And the world will find that this denial will bring the whole world to its end. So I'm asking, first of all, that God will help us, and I'm asking you to pay more careful attention to and be on Mari Salakhan's email. Because he is the prime, I would say, and I'm not stroking him, but it's the fact that this is what he does. He goes all over this nation looking for the wrongdoing, doing to ferret it out and bring it to the attention of the people. So if you want to know more about it, then ask that you be on this man's email list so that you can be informed. The first thing we need to do is to be informed. Because ignorance will kill us. Ignorance is going to kill us. And then when you have knowledge of what's going on, make sure you make a level-headed commitment to be able to be amongst the people who speak out or give your money to the cause of freeing Tariq Mahana and allowing Afia Sadiq at least to go home and die in her homeland, since you won't give her justice here. What more wrong can you do than to take a woman who has no record of being a terrorist and treat her like she is worthless? And you feel that you're a great nation now, America, the land of the, it's called the land of the free, the home of the brave. I call it the land of the coward, the home of the slave. This is America. Make sure that you are not one of those slaves by being able to speak out against the wrongdoing that's going on. Come to know who these people are. There's a lot of literature that's around. If you want to speak to me personally, I will remain behind and you can talk to me. If you want to know who Tariq Mahana is, he's a lovely young man, a PhD, who had a whole future ahead of him and was not going to waste it on trying to do something to a nation that would not stop the wrongdoing. He was wise and intelligent and well advised by his father, his imam, and his community not to do the things that they say. So know that those who will claim the things that they do is either entrapment or that they are pure lies, kathibin. I ask Allah to have mercy on those two people, and the others is Tariq Shah. I know so many more of these victims of preemptive prosecution. They're trying to prosecute them, thinking that if they do this, then they will stop them. They wouldn't go. Come and get me. Because I'm in a jihad straight up against any wrongdoing wherever I find it. Come and get me, because I will continue to speak on behalf of those who do wrong, on behalf of those who are being harmed, and against the wrongdoer. Here I am, Abdullah Talib Farouk, 724 Shamad Avenue. If you want, come and get me. Know that my voice will continue to be raised on behalf of those who are being oppressed. If I've said anything wrong, it is certainly from me, and if there's any good in what I've said, it is from Allah, the Almighty God. I ask that you be conscious, stay aware, and be concerned and committed to the right. Ameen.
Abdullah, thank you for that. Again, it goes without saying that when Muslims, of course, refer to jihad, jihad means struggle, and it's always for something good. No matter what type of struggle it is, it's always something good. We understood it in that context. Also, the Imam, again, people who speak, they're speaking their mind. It doesn't necessarily reflect the positions of the organization. Our positions, our policies, and so forth can be found on our website, and you can contact us at civilfreedoms.org to find out our positions on any given issue. But what he was referring to is what I used to hear also from Brother Mori, a quote, and I forgot who it is, the famous person who made this quote, but of the two Americas, meaning the America that was built on freedom and the Constitution and so forth, and the America of power, which does things only because it has the power to do things, and sometimes it causes transgressions. And we all know that. We know about President Obama's preacher who talked about a specific type of America. So anyway, these things have to be put into context, because I don't want anyone walking away with the improper view, or those who come just to take, certain sound bites and say, oh, this is what was said, and so forth. So I just wanted to make that clear, but we do appreciate the views of everyone. Otherwise, we wouldn't be inviting them to come and speak. I've been advised that there's going to be some additional time allowed because I'm catching a flight. We're going to end it at 5:30, but there will be an opportunity for questions and answers with Brother Mori and the Imam. I wanted to wrap up by reminding people to, if they can, to donate to our organization, whatever little you have, and only as a gesture of your support that you like what we've done and what we hope we will continue to do. We have our newsletter, and I would like people to sign up for the newsletter so that you can receive our weekly newsletter on preemptive prosecutions and those initiatives that the NCPCF is undertaking. Also, membership. We are pushing for a membership drive. We're talking about $10 a month for a year, $120 to be a member of the coalition, so that we can build ourselves in terms of numbers, that when we say something, we make a difference because we're backed by membership. I don't want to forget the co-sponsors of this event, and I will ask Leila to read those off before we end. So that you know all of the support that we've received from other organizations to help make this a possibility. Again, I thank the center also for housing us here, and I encourage everyone to participate in the case, to participate in the trial of Brother Tariq Muhanna. If there's anything else that I forgot, I will ask Leila and Sister Sharmeen to let everyone know about what I may have missed, and I truly appreciate everyone's patience, and hopefully when we come again, this place will be filled and other places will be filled because you will have reached out to others. And please visit us on the web at civilfreedoms.org. Thank you very much for your attention, and may God bless you.
Okay, now we're going to open it up for questions and answers. If you have a question, raise your hand up.
Well, I'd like to say something and then ask a question. I'm from the United National Anti-War Coalition, and what we're talking about today is one aspect of what's gone on since 9/11. The other is the wars to terrorize. I call it, instead of the war on terror, the war to terrorize everyone. And we, of course, started wars and occupations that are ongoing and expanding ever since then, in addition to the attacks on the Muslim community. And unfortunately, it took a long time for the anti-war movement to be apprised of this, what was going on in the Muslim community, and to embrace it and to join forces with it. We're the organization that, thank you for mentioning our conference last year in Albany, and also we were where we highlighted the whole issue of Islamophobia and preemptive prosecution, and brought that solidly into the anti-war arena. And we also were very active in organizing that demonstration on 9/11 last year that you mentioned, which was also very, very important that we maintain this kind of solidarity and recognize that these things are, these issues of war and injustice are extremely important, and they have to be connected. So I just wanted to say, Maury, please come to our next conference, which we'll be holding in March, at the end of March in Stamford, Connecticut, and bring that wonderful banner on Afiya Siddiqui. We want to have that prominently displayed there, and we want everyone to come to that conference where we will talk about all of the issues of war and injustice.
The name of the organization again, I'm sorry.
It's the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC.
Well, I'll be there. I've been there before. Is there any other questions? Okay, well, now I'm going to...
Comment. It's actually more of a comment than a question. Actually, it's unfortunate that, people that I know and I've known for years, when issues like this come up, you see another side of people that they tend to go into hiding, or they don't want to associate with the person or the family that they've known for years. That's not protecting you from anything.
Because that's the idea behind what they do, divide and conquer. And they want us all to be afraid and to go into hiding into our own homes, thinking that that's what's going to keep you safe. If we're all united, they can't arrest all of us. They can't put us all in an internment camp like they did with the Japanese, because they realized that was a bad idea. And if God forbid they do, then maybe we'll unite and we'll be all together. So it's not that bad.
If you're about to make some closing comments, are you about to do that? I mean, I can have this. Let me just. I started and the time got away with me to mention some very specific things that we can do, and I'd like to just quickly go down this short list now. First of all, brothers and sisters, those of us who are here, we're not that many in number, but we're enough. There are enough people here to make a big impact just by duplicating yourself. Each one, reach one, as the saying goes. Reach at least one person and work with that person to infuse in them the kind of spirit that you have for bringing about some change. If you can reach more than one, alhamdulillah, but at least one. Reach at least one. All right? Secondly, we need to exert positive pressure on our leaders and organizations. We have to do this. In the Muslim community, there is a tendency that sometimes it really works against us in very unfortunate ways. This tendency to just blindly follow the leader, just blindly follow the sheikh or the imam or the president or whoever it is. We got to stop doing this. We have a responsibility to create positive tension, fi sabilillah, for the right cause, not just for the purpose of creating tension or fitna, but generating positive tension for the right reasons. And when we do this, when we pull each other's coat, when we pull the coat of our leaders and our organizations and remind them of their responsibilities, we're actually helping them. They might take it as a criticism, and they might not take it the way that we want them to take it, but we do the best that we can to convey this concern or this message in a brotherly and sisterly way, but we be resolute in conveying that message. And if more people are conveying that same message, it's going to have an effect. The organizations and the leaders will respond. The other thing is, we already touched on that, be willing to work in coalition with our non-Muslim friends, but this is also very important, brothers and sisters. We work in coalition without sacrificing our principles, without sacrificing our beliefs and principles as Muslims. If we sacrifice what we believe and we sacrifice principles, then we will not be successful. Allah will not bless our efforts with success. So that's very important. The other thing is, we must deepen the well of our faith. We must deepen the well of our faith and understand and embrace the fact that sacrifice and struggle are necessary to establish truth. Brothers and sisters all over the country, including I know in this center, we have these periodic programs. We have these Deen intensives where we study the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We study Islam in all of its finest intricacies, and we walk away feeling good about having learned something. We have got to understand that though at the end of the day, the reason why we study the seerah, the reason why we study the life of the Prophet and we study the lives of his honorable and noble companions, and we study that whole history of struggle of Islam, we study that not just to be able to walk away, stick out our chests and say, look at what I know. We study it for the purpose of preparing ourselves for that same struggle. Why? Because life is cyclical. Names and faces change, but the pattern of human behavior remains the same. Just like there was a Pharaoh during the times of Moses, there is Pharaoh today. There is a pharaonic system today, and we have to struggle against it. And we have got to be willing to pay the price if necessary. In the Quran, we have verses like, "Or do you think that you will enter the garden of bliss without such trials as came to those who passed away before you?" They encountered suffering and adversity and were so shaken in spirit that even the Prophet and those of faith who were with him cried, "When will come the help of Allah?" We have verses like, "Do men think that they will be left alone on saying we believe and that they will not be tested?" We have verses like, "Not equal are those believers who sit at home and receive no hurt, and those who strive with their property and their persons in the cause of Allah. We have these verses, and these ayat are for the purpose of reminding us that just as the Prophet and his companions had to struggle, just like Allah made them the best among mankind, struggle and sacrifice and pay a price. Some of them died. They were killed. They suffered all kinds of indignities. But at the end of the day, because they were resolute in their faith, they ended up being victorious. Well, the same thing has to happen with us. We have to be willing to struggle and to sacrifice and to be made uncomfortable. So brothers and sisters, please take this to heart. Let us do what we can, inshallah. May Allah bless us.
Okay. Before saying Assalamu alaikum and letting you all leave, I want to read the sponsors so you all know who helped support this event. We have the sponsor, the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, which you've heard a lot about tonight. The co-sponsors include the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, the Families United for Justice in America, Project Salam, Friends of Human Rights, Peace Through Justice Foundation, American Civil Liberties Union, Boston, Al Auda, the Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, the Boston Coalition for Palestinian Rights, United for Justice with Peace, Boston, the Boston Committee to Stop FBI Repression, and Boston UNAC, the Free Tariq Mahina Support Committee, Justice for Shifa and Harris Support Committee, the Raleigh 7 Support Committee, Newton Dialogues, and the National Jericho Movement for Amnesty. I have a quick statement from the National Jericho Movement. Jericho supports this important initiative, reclaiming power and defending our communities, held at the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center. This is reclaiming the mission that has always been the calling, particularly in communities of color. All power to the people was a slogan that was propelled in the movement of the late 60s and early 70s to levels that had never been reached. Defending our communities against police aggression and brutality, drugs and inner city violence, and decay was all a part of it. These were ongoing conditions, along with historical castration and disenfranchisement of the people that gave cause for revolutionary struggles for independence and self-reliance. We are still on that page. In unity, Jihad of the Movement, co-chair National Jericho. Before letting you all leave, I want to thank you all so much for coming out. It's really good to see so many new faces, so many folks here listening to this important information. I want to thank a few community members in the audience who do really great work and have been ongoing supporting this kind of work. We have the very strong, amazing parents of Dr. Tariq Mahina, Ahmed Mahina and Suad Mahina here. You're both an inspiration, and I feel blessed to know you. We have Sister Nana Abdul Qadir, who is an amazing superwoman and has been very supportive of the Mahina family. We have Ahmed Surur, who's been a brother who's been very supportive. We have Kate Bonner Jackson, who has been essential in driving the Tariq Mahina Support Committee. We have Marwa Al-Nal, who is an amazing young Muslim sister. And we have Dara Bayer, who is an educator and a teacher to youth in Boston and does a lot of great community work. And Sister Sharmeen and everyone, I want to thank you all for coming here. We need more people like you, so alhamdulillah.
Can I include one other name? There's a sister named Layla Murad.